Okay, good afternoon and good morning and good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much joining today. My name is Kentaro Tamura, Program Director of Climate and Energy Area, IGES, Institute for Global Environment Strategies. I'm very much pleased to commence the workshop or webinar titled Climate Security Challenges in Asia Pacific, Securing Energy, Trade, and Transition. So this webinar is a part of a big research project on climate security named Asian Pacific Climate Security Project, supported by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Japan. And this project, is address various issues of climate change-induced security issues, ranging from the energy, the food, human displacement, and ocean or sea range, and also from much-layered perspective on security, that means from national defense to human security. So this project as a whole deal with climate security issue in a kind of comprehensive manner. And this particular webinar focus on action among climate mitigation or energy transition, energy security, and trade issues. And this is co-organized by Asian Development Bank Institute, ADBI, and UN Development Program, UNDP. So having said so, I'd like to invite Mr. Hiroshi Ono, Executive Director of IGES. Ono-san, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tamura-san. Do you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes. So good morning and good afternoon and good evening, esteemed speakers, distinguished guests, and my colleagues and participants from all over the world. It is a privilege to welcome you all to this important workshop organized by the Institute for Global Environment Strategies, or IGES, in collaboration with the Asian Development Bank Institute, ADBI, and the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. As we gather to address a challenge that is reshaping our economies, societies, and regional stability, that is climate security implications. The Asia-Pacific region is undergoing profound transformations, with climate risks becoming increasingly intertwined with energy security, trade policies, and resource competition. These changes demand urgent and well-coordinated responses, ensuring that our transition to a sustainable energy future is both secure and equitable. In recent years, we have witnessed the devastating impacts of climate-induced disruptions on energy systems, from infrastructure damage due to extreme weather events to shifting trade dynamics driven by evolving global policies. The region's economic future depends on how effectively we can anticipate these risks and integrate resilience into our energy strategies. It is no longer just about meeting energy demand. Instead, it is about ensuring that energy systems remain reliable, accessible, and sustainable in a rapidly changing climate. This workshop brings together experts from diverse fields to explore these pressing issues from multiple perspectives. By combining policy expertise, technical knowledge, and regional insights, we have an opportunity to shape strategies that strengthen energy resilience while addressing broader climate security concerns. I encourage all of you to engage actively, share ideas, and debate solutions that will drive meaningful progress in addressing the climate security implications on energy. Thank you for your participation. And sincere appreciation again to the co-organizers of this workshop, ADBI and UNDP. I look forward to an engaging and thought-provoking discussion ahead. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ono-san, for your opening remarks. Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Jangshuk Jung, Deputy Dean of ADBI. So he will deliver his opening remarks online.
Dear participants and dear guests, good afternoon. Welcome to this workshop, Climate Security Challenges in the Asia-Pacific, Securing Energy, Trade, and Transition. I'm Byung-Sik Jung, ADBI, the think tank of Asian Development Bank. For several years, climate changes have been priority issues for many international institutes, including IGS and ADBI. It is timely that we are gathered here today to engage in discussions on the critical intersection of climate change, energy, and trade. Climate change poses significant challenges to Asia and the Pacific. The region is facing increasing physical risks, such as damage to infrastructure from extreme weather events, and decreased production due to the growing intensity of typhoon and floods. Additionally, the region faces substantial transition risk stemming from the uncertainty created by the global shift towards a more sustainable natural economy. Overall, Asia and the Pacific are vulnerable to diverse climate security challenges that present social, environmental, economic, and policy risks. These challenges particularly impact the energy sector. The region accounts for 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions and more than 60% of global coal consumption. Meeting the demand for electricity and transitioning from coal-fired power plants to renewable energy sources pose significant challenges for our economies. Climate security implications for the region's energy sectors are profound. Extreme weather events can cause physical destruction of energy infrastructure, leading to power outages and disruption in energy supply. This vulnerability is particularly critical for renewable energy infrastructure, which may be more susceptible to damage from severe weather conditions. Additionally, the transition to renewable energy sources requires substantial investment and technological advancement, which can be hindered by climate-related financial risks. To achieve the 2030 GHG emission targets set under the nationally determined contribution NDCs and attain carbon neutrality by 2050, Asia needs substantial investment in clean energy and low carbon technology initiatives. However, current clean energy investment remains well below the necessary level, resulting in a wide gap between actual emissions and the levels consistent with the NDCs. The financial sector plays a key role in expanding clean energy's investment. To attract investment at the necessary scale, it is crucial to develop climate-related corporate information infrastructure, ensuring investors can allocate funds to decarbonization activities without concerns about greenwashing. ADBI and ADB have developed the Asian Climate Finance Dialogue to promote climate-related corporate information disclosures and train financial regulators to design frameworks supporting adequate capital allocation towards less carbon-intensive activities. Climate change also affects trade by lowering the production of key natural resources and triggering strong trade policy changes. Economies in Asia and the Pacific, being among the most open in the world, can play a pivotal role in the response to climate change, especially the transition to net zero. One significant development in this area is the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. CBAM aims to put a fair price on the carbon emitted during the production of carbon-intensive goods entering the EU, encouraging cleaner industrial production in non-EU countries. While CBAM helps prevent carbon leakages and supports global climate objectives, it also has trade implications. It imposes additional costs on exporters from countries with less stringent environmental regulations, potentially affecting trade flows and competitiveness. Trade policies can facilitate exchange of environmental goods and services, technology transfers, and investment in green sector and lower carbon technologies. Tariff reduction can promote consumption patterns favoring environmentally friendly goods and services. Action to boost green technology transfers to developing countries are also very critical. Trade facilitation, logistic reforms, and cross-border paperless trade have a strong potential to reduce carbon emissions and environmental burdens. It is encouraging to see that this workshop has brought together a diverse mix of policymakers, researchers, and industry experts to discuss these issues and identify solutions and best practice with many examples from our region. I'm sure that we can all learn a lot from each other by sharing our experience. I wish you a fruitful event. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move on to the latter part of the opening session. So Dr. Nandakumar will make an overall presentation, and his presentation will be followed by Dr. Fabian Wagner of IIASA, International Institute for Applied System Analysis, as a discussant. Okay, so Dr. Nandakumar Janardhan is the Deputy Director of Climate Energy Area of the IGS. So Nanda-san, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tamru-san, and thank you all the participants for attending this webinar. As the chairperson mentioned, my topic is climate security and energy dynamics in the Asia-Pacific region. Briefly, I'll touch upon these issues during my presentation. I'll talk about climate security in general. We'll go to the conceptual part, where I'll discuss about securitization a bit, then how climate security is looked at in the Asia-Pacific region. And then I'll move on to three major challenges the Asia-Pacific region facing. And then I would like to talk a bit about the diverse challenges and differentiated capabilities in the region. And then would like to move on to what kind of global mechanism the region can look at. in terms of climate security, as many of us know, it has been differently defined across the world. And most of the definitions in the earlier time has been about how climate change impacts security establishments, especially the military establishments and military operations. So most of the definitions on climate security has been oriented towards traditional security perspectives. However, in the recent days, I mean, recent years, you could actually see that a lot of aspects have become more and more important, and the linkages between climate and these issues have actually become more evident. And you could see that several other implications have been listed by experts as climate change, how climate change affects this, and how these are related to non-traditional security aspects. Now, these traditional as well as non-traditional security aspects together have a significant linkage with the national security, and that's how the debate on climate security definition has been progressing. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So if you look at the definitions of climate security and the debates about climate security, one can see that there is a changing shades of debates. I mean, as I mentioned, one can look at the global West, especially in the US. Most of the debates have been around traditional security aspects and military operations and all. However, once you come from debates in Europe and Asia, things have actually, the focal areas have been changing significantly. Despite all these variations in definitions, it's important to note that there's a static element as well as a dynamic element. The static element is that experts across the world have agreed to the fact that climate has a significant linkage with security aspects, of especially the national security. The dynamic aspects is that across regions and across countries, the definitions as well as the way countries have looked at the climate impacts have actually there is a significant variation. So that is a dynamic aspect. Now, during the course of study of this project, we actually try to look at how climate can be looked from the securitization perspective. Traditionally, many of you are familiar with the study which is conducted by Barry Busan, Oli Weber, and Wilde. It is about how securitization, especially this is done by the Copenhagen School of Security, where they have looked at how security threat is defined. According to their perception, security threat is defined as an issue posing an existential threat to a designated referent object. Now, when climate is actually defined as a security threat, it gives certain powers to policymakers or those who are responsible to address this, to mobilize power and take special actions to handle the existential threats. Now, that is actually one of the challenges. How one looks at climate change and how that actually has to be handled is something very important. Now, if you look at the debates that has happened in the UN Security Council, there has been multiple rounds of debates and discussions about climate security in the UN Security Council. And the latest one was in 13 December 2021, where the Security Council has put a resolution for voting, where certain countries have supported the resolution, while Russia vetoed this resolution, and also India and China also have basically opposed this resolution. According to these countries, there has not been any clear linkage between climate and security, or in a way that qualifies for the UN Security Council to look at. And there is also concerns about whether UN Security Council looking at climate security, will it lead the world to a bit more of a conflicting situation. However, if you look at the way IPCC has looked at. IPCC has established linkages between climate change and various aspects, especially like how it is linking with conflict, how that actually contributes to geopolitics, how that contributes to health, as well as various other issues. So that is more of a different kind of approach than what UN Security Council has looked at. Now, after assessing these aspects, we reach the conclusion that there are definitely certain opportunities to securitize climate. At the same time, there are also some concerns. In terms of opportunities, it's important to note that by securitizing climate, one can see climate as an immediate and an urgent threat rather than a usual environment challenge. And it also helps policymakers identify the importance of these threats and then take necessary actions. However, the challenges are about certain governments becoming more authoritative in their action, and also judicial activism. It can also sort of lead to judicial activism. So this slide, actually, we would like to say here that it has to be sort of carefully addressed and while understanding the opportunities as well as the challenges. Now, in Asia Pacific region, the region under study, we are actually specifically looking at East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Pacific Islands. Several countries have our study has actually been looking at several countries, but some of the countries we haven't looked at, but we try to, our information gathering is basically across all these 4 regions. Now, quite a lot of studies have also happened on climate security, and some of the studies in this part of the world are focusing on 4 aspects. This is a study conducted by Kameyama and Ono. In this study, experts have actually pointed out that climate security is sort of important from the human security, national security, geopolitics and security risk, as well as military security perspectives. Now, this is sort of an academic perspective, but in terms of policy relevance, I'll come to that discussion later in the later part of this presentation. In terms of triple challenges for the climate and the climate impacts, 3 areas are of special importance. First of all, energy security, how climate is impacting energy security of a country, how climate is impacting energy transition, and how that is also impacting the industry across the region. In terms of climate change and energy security, there is a clear linkage because climate impacts can affect the accessibility, affordability, and adaptability of countries to energy supply sources, as well as extreme weather events can affect the supply lines and things like that. Now, in terms of transition, climate change has been considered as a transition bottleneck because it can actually affect the critical infrastructure that are required for energy transition. It can affect non-conventional energy sources infrastructure, alternative energy installations. It can also affect supply lines, especially of the transition minerals that are critical for energy transition. So we consider climate impacts as a transition bottleneck as well here. Now, third aspect is that how climate change is affecting industries. There's a very clear linkage in terms of climate change causing physical risks, like extreme weather impacts and water shortage and heat stress affecting industries. And also logistics can be affected, especially supply chains can be affected for the industries. And it can also pose a transition risk to industries. So these points highlight the importance of industries to transform at the earliest possible. Now, in terms of strategy for the Asia-Pacific region, as Asia-Pacific region has multiple challenges affecting these key areas, and also the region has multiple capabilities or differentiated capabilities. The region will have to look at what kind of policies will be applicable for the entire region, like boosting regional cooperation, supporting local resilience, and jointly developing a multi-level governance mechanism. And we also consider that the region will also have a major role in shaping a global governance mechanism where local and national players can actively contribute in strengthening emergency preparedness and responses, while national, regional, and global players could contribute to building collective action for a global governance mechanism. Now, in terms of way forward, as I have mentioned here, we already have experts from several institutions present here, and we are in conversation with different experts. And I've also recently engaged with EASA, and we also have been engaging with experts from MIT and also Niti Aayog. So we have been, like IGS has been working with different experts in trying to understand how we can take this forward, and probably like sort of a collective effort to take this to address the critical challenges. And in order to address that, we are actually trying to look at some of the important questions about how what kind of common challenges are there and how the region can address these challenges, how the geopolitical challenges can address, the region can address, and lastly, how Japan can contribute or leverage its technological expertise, financial resources, and regional partnerships to support collective action in the region. With this, I'll stop here and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Nand-san. So now I'd like to invite IG's old friend, Dr. Fabian Wagner. He's now Dean of Capacity Development Academic Training at EASA. Long time no see, Fabian.
Yes, thank you, Tamura Sensei. It's good to be back, even virtually. I think it's almost to the day that I left IGES about 21 years ago. Professor Janardhan, thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to kick off this conversation as a discussion to this framing presentation. Let me be brief. What I really like, I like the approach that you took. It was a very clear walkthrough to bring us to the framework that you have in mind and to open some of the big questions here. I think the framing in terms of security is very useful, and you're touching on the right concepts. I would like to make 2 points before really returning to the framework that you're sort of providing towards the end. So first is one aspect of the security paradigm that I find very useful is maybe to also delineate a little bit from the adaptation paradigm or adaptive dynamics paradigm, where we typically work with the sort of an assumption that we have a stable situation, and then a threat occurs, and then we have a reaction and return back to a stable situation. And security may be then, in this kind of framing, be measured by the size of the threat that you can handle or that you can annihilate before it actually arises. Now, I think such a framing has a problem that it has sort of a status quo bias. It's tend to think about the status quo as equilibrium. And I think what we are now what we now observe is that climate change is not just sort of an abstract threat, but it's part of the future. And therefore, it's not useful to think in terms of baselines and deviations from the baseline. So there's a saying, the only constant in the world is change. And I think the security paradigm nicely addresses this saying in the sense that it does not think in terms of sort of with and without climate change, but it sort of addresses the issue heads on. So very useful. The second point that I want to make is clearly, when you start to plan to enhance security, and this is what your framework eventually is about, how do we actually increase security? How do we build resilience into the system? Then clearly we have to think about what kind of analytical methodology, or what kind of methodology will we use to support decision makers in enhancing that system. And clearly what we need here is we need to describe and maybe simulate complex situations. So we have to think about what are the tools to help us to think through this systematically. Now, obviously, what comes to mind then is that we may need to involve some kind of model. We want to co-produce this kind of assessment framework, sort of to get a buy-in from the various stakeholders, making sure that we don't overlook anything that is important. So there are different methodologies out there. I think the one thing that I want to emphasize here, it sort of came up as a side issue, a very slight issue in your presentation, but I want to bring it out and then maybe get rid of it. Is the idea of that we want to find the best solution to this problem, right? We clearly understand that maybe there isn't the best solution because we have multiple objectives here to address. When we are focusing, even if we're just focusing on two objectives, maybe efficiency on the one hand and robustness or resilience on the other, we already see that there is a trade-off. And not only do we have a trade-off and multiple objectives, but we may even have concepts like security, for example, or resilience, that in fact we can only, in a sense, measure after the fact. Resilience is something that is clearly systemic and cannot sort of necessarily be assessed in advance. So clearly the question should be more, how can we stay flexible given that we cannot plan for everything optimally? And so two concepts come to mind. People talk about nowadays of satisficing rather than optimization strategies. And generally, if we go back to good old game theoretical vocabulary, we're looking for mixed strategies that can absorb a number of shocks. So you can already tell I'd like to see more systems thinking, more feedback loops, more thinking about the interactions between the various aspects. I'd like to see a little bit more thinking in terms of scenarios, what if, and then it's very clear what the capacity building or capacity development requires, and that is more ability to think in terms of futures, more future literacy. Okay. I come to the conclusion. I just want to highlight, I really like the framework that presented on slide 21. A number of these concepts clearly speak to my heart, especially this cross-cutting mechanisms. We need to build collective action. We need to build the knowledge platforms. One thing that I was missing, maybe the hot topic, the buzzword today is AI. So how do we use AI for the benefit of humanity, of security? I would have another few things about what it actually means to build capacity, but I leave that. I like the idea of mainstreaming track 2 diplomacy. Another buzzword that gets dropped under the table nowadays a little bit is multilateralism. Just make sure that we think in terms of multilateralism and not necessarily just power games, as we see so often nowadays. Non-zero-sum games is the key word here. And then the last thing that I want to say is, it sort of struck me when you said, let's build collaborations. And there's clearly national organizations built in. Clearly, Fiji can talk to India and vice versa, and so on and so forth. But your slide showed very clearly that what is the backbone of all of this is an international system, are the international organizations. So we need to strengthen the international system again as well. Okay, I think I'm running out of time, so again, thanks very much for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion later on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Fabian. Yeah, thank you very much for kind of provide us very insightful input. Particularly, you gave us some pointed out some caveat. That means when we try to enhance climate security, we will face multiple objectives, some of which are kind of trade-off. So how to minimize that kind of trade-off and how to maximize the synergy among these multiple objectives, I think they are key issue for us. So also Fabian suggested several policy tool or approach to address these issues. Yeah, thank you very much, Fabian, and hope we will keep on continue to our collaboration between IGS and ESR. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Then I'd like to move on to the panel discussion. Okay, so already a previous presentation is the discussion by Nandu and Fabian already indicated physical impact of climate change and the climate mitigation policy, the energy policy or industrial and trade policy, and geopolitical tension intertwined and leading to a lot of complexity. So that question is how we can navigate such complexity. So this panel discussion is designed to give us some insight on this question, how to navigate this kind of complexity from three broad perspectives. One is from the U.S., change in U.S. policy under the Trump administration. The second is the Asian energy and trade economic relations in the climate-constrained world. And thirdly, geopolitics and climate security and conflict in Asia. So we have to discuss these three set of issues. We have three distinguished panelists today. First, Professor Michael Merling is the Deputy Director of Climate Center for Energy and Environment Policy Research at MIT. And he is also a professor at the University of Strathclyde Law School in Scotland. And second, we have Dr. Badri Narayan Gopalakrishnan. Sorry for my pronunciation. But he is a fellow at NITI Aayog, policy think tank of the government of India. He was formerly the head of the trade division at NITI Aayog. And lastly, but not least, Dr. Louise Van Schaik. She is the head of unit of EU and Global Affairs, Clingendale Institute. She coordinates Clingendale research on the field of climate change and sustainability. Thank you very much for joining us today. So I'd like to ask a set of questions to each of you. So I would appreciate if you answer one by one. So first, I'd like to invite Michael. Thank you very much for joining us from the, I think very late in your place, but thank you very much joining today. And I'd like to ask Michael in terms of the changing policy in the United States under the current Trump administration and its implication for Asia. So first question is that, so with President Donald Trump back in office, so what more major shifts do you foresee in the United States climate and energy policy, and how might these changes influence global climate governance? And give part to U.S. withdrawal from international climate arrangement, what's the risk for Asia Pacific economy that rely on global trade and investment in clean energy technologies. So this is our first set question to you, Michael.
Kentaro-san, thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. And it's good to see many familiar faces over in Hayama. Clearly, we've already observed that there's a dramatic retrenchment of the United States on climate policy. I probably don't even have to go into much detail, but for those who may not follow it in so closely, and that's probably good for mental health to not do that. Already in week one, the direction of travel became relatively quickly clear. The withdrawal from the Paris Agreement was announced on the very first day of inauguration in an executive order, the cancellation of all climate finance commitments and national energy and climate policy. In fact, what's interesting is climate is virtually ignored. There's no mention of climate. There's very little mention of renewable energy. It is all about national energy dominance, which is clearly centered in the sort of policy vision of the new administration on fossil fuels. And the criteria or priorities are affordability, reliability, security. Sustainability, again, not mentioned anywhere. There's a National Energy Dominance Council now under the Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum. And another executive order on day one declared a national energy emergency, which is interesting because Nanda Kumar-san was just sort of mentioning how securitization involves the use of emergency powers. And that is very much what the Trump administration is invoking. This executive order instructs agencies across the federal government to identify their emergency powers under a rafter of different existing congressional laws that allow them to do things that you normally would not be able to do, but in a state of emergency, you can do. It portrays sort of this crisis on the energy front, which energy experts deny exists, but nonetheless, that's the administration's view, that we haven't had enough energy, and the previous administration, with its focus on sustainability, has sort of hampered U.S. energy development and reliability and security of energy. And so now the new administration wants to, of course, support fossil fuel deployment, development, also some other technologies like nuclear, for instance. There's one area that it mentions as having an interest in developing and supporting, and that's critical raw materials and critical minerals. So this is something that, for people working on climate, of course, perk up because they are also so very critical for decarbonization technologies. But otherwise, across everything that we've seen in these first 2 months roughly from the new administration, renewables are hardly mentioned. In some cases, there are even signs that they're actively looking to impede the continued sort of progress, the continued deployment of renewables, for instance, by pausing any new leasing and any new approvals of wind energy projects and solar projects on federal lands, and especially offshore wind. So this can be a real setback for an area that had some momentum under the previous administration. What's not so clear, and this is really something where the division of powers in the US, to the extent we still have it, and hopefully we'll retain it, plays a role, is the role of Congress in this. So the Inflation Reduction Act and some other legislative successes in the last 4 years have been quite critical for climate progress. This is not something the administration, so the executive branch, can unilaterally simply revoke. This is statutory law adopted by Congress. And so it's not entirely clear whether the new Congress now, with Republican majorities in both chambers, in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, will choose to target and roll back elements of the Inflation Reduction Act, of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Chips and Science Act. But there are signs that they want to try and roll back elements in order to fund tax cuts in other areas. So as a fiscal sort of measure, especially tax credits, for instance, for clean technologies like electric vehicles. So there's still a penumbra of uncertainty. But this uncertainty is important. It's creating an atmosphere of, a lack of clarity on the direction of travel that is already starting to dramatically hamper new investment in clean technology manufacturing, clean technology deployment, etc. You asked about the global implications. Very clearly, of course, this is a setback for climate action around the world. The largest economy, the second largest emitter, is completely moving back on federal policy, at least. And hundreds of billions of dollars less will be going into, for instance, deployment and manufacturing of clean technologies, which will have spillover effects on cost declines on clean technology, on the technologies themselves, just the scale of manufacturing, etc. So that in itself has an effect, of course. After now the third withdrawal from an international climate treaty, I think there's no way that the US will. It will take very long for the US to again be seen as a reliable partner in international climate cooperation, if ever. One time a fluke, a second time you really worry, the third time it's clear that this is structural, this is inherent to the US political system, that it's sort of an unreliable on and off kind of partner on climate. And at worst, I fear that there is even a chance that the US might now side with other petrostates. Remember, the United States is now the world's largest oil and gas producer. It produced more oil and gas last year than any other country in history. That it has now a domestic sort of political economy interest, to use game theoretical thinking, to side with other petrostates like Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, etc., and actively obstruct international climate cooperation. The US is still in the UNFCCC. It only withdrew from the Paris Agreement, which will take effect after a year. So we'll see then in Belém whether or not this will actually what direction this might take. Finally, I think there's lasting damage to multilateral institutions outside of the climate regime, like the WTO, for instance. These have already been showing some signs of trouble, of course, under previous administrations. It's not purely due to the Trump administration, but the erratic and confrontational trade policy that the current administration is deploying to advance all kinds of political priorities may have a chilling effect on trade and international trade in clean technologies. And finally, one point, you mentioned also investment. And for countries that depend on sort of trade and investment in clean energy technologies, it's already visible that many countries, and especially China, that export large amounts of clean energy technologies, are reacting to the to these erecting trade barriers and non-trade barriers that are making it harder for their goods to access the US market by having outbound investment into the United States to build manufacturing capacities in the US. This is, not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that then some of the production shifts. The question is, though, I think with the very unpredictable nature, the confrontational and hostile nature, the chaos in the United States, whether we actually will see that investment materialize, or we will instead see a lot of this production simply reroute to other countries around the world, which again, has pros and cons. So I don't know. It's a pessimistic view all in all, but hopefully it gives you a sense of where I see things going. Back to you, Kentaro.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for your answer. And the second question is, you already touched upon the issue surrounding IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, and you just pointed out not so easy for the executive branch to change that IRA, but there are some uncertainty in the future. And also now, if you look at the EU, European continent, they're going to introduce the CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanism. So there are these, new development outside Asia. So do you think the Trump policy are changing this framework, and also what impact might they have on Asia industrial decarbonization strategy or broader economic stability? This is a second question.
Thank you, Kentaro-san. I'll keep this answer a little bit shorter since my first one was so long. So first of all, I think, in the last several years, we really saw a turn to industrial policy as a defining feature of decarbonization in a number of jurisdictions, especially advanced economies relying on government intervention and in particular subsidies in the form of grants, concessional loans, tax credits, and so on, to specifically promote green industries, clean technology manufacturing. And I think we're seeing sort of maybe that phase kind of decline now, and we're moving into perhaps a geopolitical phase that also affects climate action, that is really overshadowed by great power rivalry and competition in an increasingly hostile and adversarial world. When the Biden administration advanced and sort of promoted and succeeded in getting the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, et cetera, it really sort of influenced a number of other countries. There was this spillover effect. The EU responded very quickly out of concern that it would see, its own clean technology industries be attracted by the US market and start a green drain or a green leakage effect, sort of. And its responses were then the Green Deal Industrial Plan and the Net Zero Industry Act, the Critical Raw Materials Act, et cetera. So you could really see sort of this spillover effect from US policy direction having impacts on other countries. And I think this was also seen in other parts of the world. And now, really, I mean, with the US administration currently likely going to push to sort of stymie and potentially roll back some of these industrial policy measures to promote clean technologies, and instead, if at all, using industrial policy to focus maybe on things like nuclear or technologies related to energy security. But otherwise, I really don't anticipate much sort of appetite to adopt great investment packages that would be in any way relevant to climate. I wonder what the spillover effects will be there. One thing that I already anticipate is a spillover effect of US policy on trade and the threat, to use, we all expect with sort of bated breath what's going to come out next month of this idea that the administration will unleash a complete revamp of trade policy, fundamentally sort of upending the basic principles of the multilateral trading order with what they call the reciprocal tariff policy plan, in which the US would impose tariffs that would account for the tariffs in other countries, country by country, but also factor in any other types of measures, tariff or non-tariff barriers that disadvantage US producers. And it's very clear that that could also include, for instance, European, so EU sustainability related legislation and policies, things like the corporate sustainability due diligence directive, reporting directive, but also the CBAM. If the US administration determines that the CBAM imposes costs on US producers or disadvantages US producers, they may choose to implement tariffs to sort of offset or compensate for that against European goods. This could destabilize the political support behind the CBAM in the EU and in many other countries as well. Any sort of trade-related climate measures that have been explored as part of industrial policy packages, et cetera, to advance clean technology might suddenly now be something that's very vulnerable because there's fear that the US might retaliate by increasing tariffs dramatically to factor and compensate for those things. So that is a future spillover effect that I could anticipate from the new administration's policy direction. The question is, can the EU hold the ground? Will it hold the ground? And that's something, that we might revisit in another country in sort of scenarios. And I very much share Fabian's notion that in this world of tremendous uncertainty about the range of possible outcomes, thinking about different scenarios really is important because each actor has so many different interests and so many challenges and sort of risks at play that influence what it might ultimately choose to do.
Okay, thank you very much. And this is the last question to you. So could you tell us how might US retrenchment from international climate leadership influence other countries and regions to adjust their climate and energy strategies? And could China, given its dominance in clean technologies, leverage a leadership vacuum left by US to strengthen its global role, possibly in coordination with EU? So you already touched upon some China's response to the increasing tariffs, but yeah, if you reply to this question, that would be appreciated.
Arigato, Kentaro-san. So yes, I think this sort of plays a little bit on what I was just saying about thinking in scenarios because again, there's so many different, dramatically different possible outcomes. And so I'll really pick up from the previous answer. You know, the EU is I find in a very, very difficult position. You know, it's traditionally dependent on the United States for security guarantees, also for military security or military equipment, and increasingly also for fossil fuels. From being primarily reliant on Russia, it's now primarily reliant on the United States for its LNG imports, for instance, for its natural gas supply. So there is this dependence. At the same time, Europe has for many years now endured sort of an economic slowdown. I wouldn't call it a slump, but it has seen its economic growth lag significantly behind, for instance, the US's economic growth. And there's been growing competitive pressures on a number of European industries. So there's this also concern about, you know, the Europe as a place for business, as an economic location. And reports like the Draghi report, Letta report on competitiveness, the competitiveness compass, etc., have influenced a lot, I think, the mindset in Europe. And now we face the situation where the the EU is having to get used to its traditional ally, the transatlantic alliance, becoming this very unreliable thing, and the US no longer being sort of a reliable ally simply. And it's already, I think, sparked some interesting responses. I'm German by birth, and so the election recently in Germany and sort of the new coalition forming and steps being taken clearly in response to the new administration in the US's sort of initial policy declarations and rather hostile signals towards the European Union and countries like Germany, and even you could say sort of rhetorical intervention in the election itself, really have been quite dramatic to see. So, for instance, Germany, like the European Union, quite adamant about fiscal discipline, has more or less overturned years of consensus on not entering a certain amount of new debt every year, given facing the new challenges. So it's already sort of changing I think in very fundamental ways in response to the challenge from the US. And this, of course, then begs the question: if the US is no longer ally, what are the new alliances that the EU might enter in the climate space? But you mentioned China, and I think China is perhaps the even more important player here. If we think of the US as the world's largest oil and gas producer, and increasingly a petrostate, where even though it has sort of tried to lead on clean technology manufacturing, innovation, etc., during the previous administration, a large chunk of its economy is dependent and based on fossil fuels now. And so indeed, its alliances may be more natural going forward with countries like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates than with the EU. But China, think of China. It leads on clean technology manufacturing. It leads on clean technology investment in China and around the world under the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. It leads increasingly on clean technology innovation as well. I think it has more new clean technology patents than all other countries together, which is unsurprising, given that it produces 50 to 90% in every single major segment of the clean technology market. So with vertical integration, with comparative advantages from scale and agglomeration effects, 10% of the Chinese GDP come from clean technologies, and the export in particular of these clean technologies. And so you have to think of in sort of a Putnam, two-level game sense that its interests in foreign policy and its international alliances must be influenced also by the economic interests it has in having the world continuing to purchase and indeed accelerate the uptake of Chinese-produced clean technologies and critical raw materials and components. And so to me, that begs the question, might there be sort of an equilibrium point and sort of a tilt, a critical tilting point at some point reached where China decides it's no longer going to be the developing country that holds back and sort of plays an ambivalent role in international climate negotiations, but it actually fills the vacuum that the US is leaving if it becomes more allied with petrostates, and really retrenches more lastingly from climate cooperation. Is this a space that China could enter? Because it has every economic interest to do so, to stimulate and support the global transition, energy transition, because that will benefit China's economy, which is still so dependent on exports, despite efforts to strengthen domestic consumption in recent weeks and months. So I think, the bandwidth again of potential outcomes is huge, but this would upend, I think, a lot of traditional understandings and expectations of who the leaders are and what the actors' individual sort of roles are in international climate cooperation. Thank you, Kentaro.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. Give us a very insightful your view on the current situation and the policy development in the United States and the implication for growth and also Asia. Particularly given this fundamental shift in the U.S. politics, the question is now if the United States will continue to be the reliable partner or not. So this is a really fundamental question. Not only Asia, particularly Japan, are facing now. So given this uncertainty, actually, you and also Fabian pointed out the importance of the kind of the scenario analysis to look at this future. Yeah, that's a very insightful comment. Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. Okay, so I'd like to move on to the next panelist, Dr. Banduri-san. Thank you very much for joining us from India. So again, I have a three set question to you. So please answer one by one. The first question is evolving climate policy in the United States and the EU. How should Asian economy position themselves in global trade and economic relation to mitigate a potential impact of major, or for example, the CBAM, while still pursuing economic growth and energy transition goals? So this is the first question to you.
Arigato, Kantaro-san. Thank you very much, and I also thank you, Michael and Luis, and also Fabian and Nanda for the wonderful presentations. So this is first of all, I'm in Seattle now in the US. I was in Delhi before, but now I'm here. So small correction. And in terms of the specific question you asked, I completely understand the gravity of this problem and kind of concur with what Michael already talked about in terms of the implications of the changes in the US. But if you think more in terms of the CBAM and EUDR and other measures that have been more consistent, more solid set of policies coming from the Europeans, and how the Asian economies, particularly the developing countries like India, what can they do and what are they doing to kind of on one hand mitigate the negative impact coming from these measures, and on the other hand take this as an opportunity to accelerate the energy transition strategies. So the of course the positive impact is what I just said, that you're nudging or forcing or pushing the economies towards emissions reduction, greener production and consumption patterns and so on. But the negative side is that you're forcing them to do it faster than they originally aim for. If you take, for example, India's net zero, the target date is 2070, as we know. Of course, some of the large corporates in India, they have declared to the target year to be 2030, like Tata Group and so on. But still, even 2030 is, although it's pretty close, it's still 5 years from now. But the CBAM kind of measures are starting pretty much immediately the next 1-2 years. So in this context, definitely the any kind of tax is a burden on the the exporters, whether it is the tariffs that Trump is talking about, or the this kind of carbon taxes for which the industry is not ready or not ready yet. So so these are the negative and positive effects. The way in which with some of the approaches that are being taken in these countries are first of all to develop an emissions trading system, develop a carbon pricing system, carbon taxes, and so on, so that they can incentivize the domestic industry to uh, you know already start complying with these international measures. So in that sense, you are going to reduce the burden on these industries by making some of these international requirements also domestic. So within the country also they kind of mandate some of this. So this way there is a level playing field between the exporters and the domestic industries focusing on the domestic consumption. And secondly, if for example you match your carbon tax with the EU carbon tax, at least the money stays within the country, and then that the tax revenue that is generated can be used for green transition. It can be distributed to the industries for green transition and so on. So these are some of the thought processes going on. Apart from, of course, the combative measures like going to the WTO and fighting that no, this is not WTO compliant and so on, which is definitely not a meaningful strategy. And countries are talking about it, but nobody is doing it because it's for many reasons. First, these measures are actually pretty much WTO compliant. It's very difficult to argue against them. And secondly, WTO itself is non-functional, particularly dispute settlement mechanism and the appellate body and so on. And we don't have any hope for improving that with the current changes in the US administration too. So with all these things, I think the best thing the developing countries, the Asian economies can do is to go with the flow and try to make the best out of these measures so that they can develop their domestic emissions reduction capabilities. So now, continuing from what Michael talked about in terms of the US uncertainty in the US policies and so on, because that's also part of your question. CBAM is one, but also the other countries, US particularly. There, I think, as I just mentioned, tariffs are going to be big. But also, I remember a lot of discussion going on internally about even mimicking some kind of CBAM. With the Biden administration, it was pretty much coming. If Democrats had come, CBAM would have been there. But with this administration, I think it may just take a different turn because there is some discussion about green steel and so on, green steel for import. So instead of course, steel and aluminum tariffs are there right now, but there can also be other kinds of non-tariff measures, which may be not. So it's all about terminology. It may not be called as green carbon tax or something, but it may be it may come in some other form. So that is another thing that can happen. But I think the important message that the developing countries, Asian economies must keep in mind is that the road to sustainability, the road to green transition, net zero transition, despite all these hindrances and blocks, it has to be smooth. It has to go on. So despite all these geopolitical changes and so on. So I think with these measures can be a catalyst to reach there. But these the economies can try to tweak their domestic policies, tweak some of their strategies to ensure that these measures are the positive aspects of these measures are highlighted and enhanced, and the negative effects are minimized.
Okay, Thank you very much, Yana-san. Okay. So next, sorry, I jump to the Luis-san to ask one question. So yeah, so is it okay to ask one question to you?
Sure, please.
Okay, so Luis-san, thank you for waiting for a long time. But first question to you is that the Asian Pacific region is facing a complex interplay of climate security challenges, as we discussed. So from resource scarcity to displacement and conflict. So how do you see climate-induced stresses shaping regional geopolitics, and what strategy can government to adopt to mitigate potential security risks? So this is the first question to you, Luisa.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. And it was also great to listen to the previous speakers, and I hope to hear more from them later on. I think it's fascinating that you focus also on this security angle of the climate challenges for the Indo-Pacific region. At Klingendahl Institute and also at the Planetary Security Initiative, that is a Klingendahl project on climate security, we have done quite some work on this dimension of climate change. And I also wanted to point out, because the securitization concept was discussed at the start of the webinar, that in my perspective, it depends very much on where you sit, on how you view the securitization angle. If you are from a region or a country where the military and hard security angle is something scary, so to say, then you're logically more critical. If you are concerned about migrants being referred to as almost like criminals, then you are cautious about the securitization of climate change. And also from a perspective of action, sometimes it's more helpful to present climate change as an economic development and an green growth opportunities, as we have seen, of course, with all the ideas on the Green Deal and green growth policies in many parts of the world. That being said, to, let's say, deny that there is a security dimension of climate change, that extreme weather events will hit very hard, that this also has an impact on geopolitics, on the relationship between countries, is of course also kind of naive and will also not help us. I mean, it's a fact that militaries will have to prepare for climate change, that if extreme weather events occur in the field of humanitarian assistance and disaster response, civilian actors can do just as much. At a certain point, you need, let's say, more capabilities to help out. And indeed also that climate change exacerbates these scarcities that you refer to. So I think the relationship between climate change and security is there, and we have to make the most of it, but we also have to realize that there is always this kind of normative perception linked to it, and it's also used in a political way. So just to point out, when the Assad government in Syria said, yes, it's true, because of climate change, the people revolted against me, then of course everybody understands that this is just a dictator that had huge human rights violations and misusing this argument in a political way. And also, indeed, climate change should not be used to justify boots on the ground in other countries. Although, when climate change hit a part of my own country, the Netherlands, in the Caribbean, also our Navy had to sail there and intervene to provide law and order, because, you know, the complete island was destroyed and it was not even possible to make contact with the authorities, local authorities. So it's a part of our country, so it was not, let's say, a foreign interference, but still, you know, these issues can be quite sensitive. So I also wanted to second what Michael Meeling has already mentioned, and also Badri Narayan has mentioned, that we see indeed these different positions of the great powers, with the US having become a petrostate and exporter of fossil fuels, also now a new desire to export fossil technologies again to Africa and other places in the world. Whereas the other big economic powers, the EU and China, and also to a certain extent India. I'm actually today in New Delhi and joining this webinar from India. Are countries that by and large import fossil fuels. And if you look at the European Union, in the energy crisis times when Russia invaded Ukraine, we spent more than 4% of our gross national income to imported gas and oil. We also realized that Russia used the gas dependency as a weapon against us, and also deliberately manipulated the prices. At the same time, we had a scandal in the European Parliament called Qatargate, and also the football championship. And so there are several Gulf states that were able also to blackmail basically the EU, and most of the other countries where the EU has a trade relationships in oil and gas are not, let's say, desirable relationships. So we see very clearly in the EU that there is also, let's say, an energy security as a security issue dimension. I mean, ideally we would import all our gas from Norway, but there's just limits to the capacities. And I think also Norway typically is the exception to the rule when it comes to petrostates and their contribution to global stability and safety in this world. So then I realized very much over the past years that I've been in many places where people said, well, actually now, part of the Russian gas dependency is dependent by an acceleration of the energy transition and clean technologies, but also by the US LNG. Thank you, US. And of course, the US also wanted to call this freedom fuels for Europe. But then the Europeans said, wait a minute, but freedom fuels, I mean, we don't want to import gas anymore in 2050 when we want to be climate neutral. And we also want to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels in light of our climate targets. So I think you can see really clearly that the LNG dependency was already a little bit causing unease. Then you saw with the election of Donald Trump that Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, said, well, maybe we should buy more LNG to address the trade deficit concerns of Donald Trump. But then many others in Brussels, and I think that's now the mainstream, see it indeed as an additional liability. Because now we're not only dependent on the security and the weapon industry from the US and the nuclear umbrella, as they call it, but also on the LNG imports, and it's really considered a liability. Now, to go back to the Indo-Pacific region, I think for China it's the same, that for a longer term perspective, they've always considered, energy, strategic autonomy. And also that has prompted two things: their clean tech development, and also because they saw it as a new business opportunity, but also their supply chains of the critical raw materials that are needed for these clean technologies. So for years they've invested in these supply chains. And I guess now for the Indo-Pacific countries, the other Indo-Pacific countries, there is always the necessity also to think more in these terms of strategic autonomy. Where is the water coming from? The Mekong region. What happens if Himalaya glaciers melt? What happens if floods are taking place more regularly? The city of Jakarta sinking, parts of Bangladesh becoming uninhabitable. What happens if the temperature rises? And then also, how does this affect dependencies? Where do you get your electricity from? But also, who has the software on which grid systems are being operated? Can they switch it off? in case they want to. Can they use it as a way to spy? What about the safety of your critical energy infrastructure? And then I think if you look at most of the countries, well, I'm not even talking about the low-lying island states, the Pacific sits that are literally sinking. I think for many countries, it's also a kind of a smart choice to accelerate their energy transition, because usually it helps countries to boost, their energy situation. And then, let's say, other options like climate smart agriculture, nature-based solutions, to boost the natural defenses of coastal lines, like the mangroves, and considering livelihoods of people that might be affected by climate change, better early warning, early action systems. So, anyways, I think I'm saying a lot of things, but I think there's, let's say, a whole different mindset that is needed basically to deal with these really systemic risks of climate change that will also become more dangerous, because I think the likelihood of the world through collective action mitigating climate change is unfortunately also decreasing with the return of, let's say, the fossil fuel interests in the US and elsewhere. Okay, I'll stop here. I've said a lot. Maybe I hope it was comprehensible.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luis-san, giving us some, from the EU perspective, the US current situation, and also role of China, and also some your view on the other developing Asian countries, including some small island countries. Thank you very much. Then, I'd like to move back to the Badri-san to ask another question. So next question is that, so extreme weather event and rising sea level pose growing risk to global supply chains, particularly those reliant on maritime trade. So how do you assess the potential disruption to sea lane of communication, sea lane of trade, and what strategy should Asian economy adopt to ensure trade resilience in the face of climate-induced uncertainty? So this is next second question.
Thank you, Kantaro-san. And this is a very, very important aspect because most of the trade policies and global value chain related strategies, both by the governments and also by the private sector organizations, in my opinion, based on my interactions, I can see that they are not taking this seriously enough. There has been a lot of talk about it, discussions about it, but when you really see to what extent these are incorporated in the policy strategies, that is not there, particularly in the developing economies in Asia, and also of course Africa and other areas as well. And I think and when we can see the impact of that already in the past, if you look at any of the major uh, climate related disasters that happened in different parts of the world, you could directly see the impact of that on the prices, on the supply demand interactions and so on. Both man-made disasters and climate disasters, right? So we can take, for example, the war in Ukraine, because of its the grains, and Luis has talked about the energy commodities, and even if you go back to COVID, how supply chain got disrupted because of the even before the pandemic happened. I remember even since December 2019, January 2020, even then the global supply chain got disrupted a lot, and then we faced this supply chain disruptions since then until maybe a year ago, right? It was just happening for a very long time. So these are not even major climate disasters. These are like other kinds of disasters which led to this. But climate disasters can lead to much more disruptions in the various aspects of supply chain, because the global supply chain and global value chain has got so deeply intertwined and integrated in terms of sectors and countries across the world, that anything happening, any climate disaster that may happen in any part of the world can affect the entire world. So I think going back to what Fabian mentioned about scenario analysis and so on, yes, I has come up with this. I'm an avid user of their SSP, so, shared socioeconomic pathway. So I think all of us are probably in one way or the other. We use that, and these kind of scenarios are going to be really helpful. We have to really assess how these climate disasters are going to happen in different parts of the world, in under different scenarios. When we have enough climate action, when we don't have enough climate action, and so on. And there is also the question of mitigation and adaptation. So how much are we going to adapt to some of these changes? So definitely this has to be kept in mind. One more thing that I've seen that's kind of not sufficiently considered by many economists is the pragmatic use of trade policy as a tool to kind of uh, de-risk some of these climate disasters. So if we, for example, have a very restrictive, protective trade policy, and then focus more on developing domestic capabilities, which is what many of the developing Asian countries have been doing, India included. Then what happens is you expose the domestic consumers and producers to a lot of risk. If something happens, if a major climate disaster happens domestically, then your entire supply is gone if you're very inward oriented. But if you are more open to trade, then there is going to be a cushioning that's happening. So when there is domestic climate disasters, there will be some part of the world where these disasters may not be happening simultaneously at the same time. So you can import from there. So there the supply must be intact and you can import from there. So I think thinking of pragmatic trade policies wherein you develop trade relationships, alliances with as many countries as possible, so that you can de-risk some of the impact of climate disasters, both domestically and also in other countries. So when you're trading with multiple countries, then if one country runs into problem, you can still depend on some other country. So I think we have to think, policymakers have to think along these lines to be more open, to be more collaborative with other countries. And also, I think the adaptation mindset also has to be, considered. Many of the developing countries are still not sufficiently getting into this adaptation mode. Mitigation is happening to some extent, but as you all know, any amount of mitigation, as we see in the world happening today, is not sufficient to, make a dent on our future. So adaptation has to go on simultaneously, and that's something I think the developing countries need to learn. And I think there is also a lot of potential for the developed countries to develop capabilities, capacity in the developing countries for these kind of aspects on the ground, developing adaptation capabilities and so on, and also forging alliances for trade as a tool to mitigate some of the economic impact of climate disasters, economic and trade impact. So I think these are some of the aspects that we should consider.
Thank you very much, Bandi-san. Okay, so Again, I would like to move to the Luis-san to another question. So next question is, as climate change impact intensified, there are exacerbating existing vulnerability in the fragile states, and including the risk of a conflict over resources. So which region in Asia do you see the most susceptible to the climate-driven security crisis? And what role can regional organization play in conflict prevention? So this is our second question.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I agree that in the Indo-Pacific region and in Asia, if you look at, let's say, all the predictions, there's these huge risks, cyclones in the Bay of Bengal. Together with the think tank in India, IPCS, we published a report on climate security in the Bay of Bengal region where we really outlined many of these risks, and we have also looked at. We also did a track 1.5 dialogue with BIMSTEC for the region on specifically humanitarian assistance and disaster response. So the Bay of Bengal region, where a large part of the population, world's population, is living, is one of these very vulnerable regions. There's also the high risks of migrations. Everybody knows about the Rohingyas. So this is clearly one of the, let's say, hotspots. But of course, there's also others like the Himalayas, where the glaciers are melting, and where there's also the conflicts between some of the regional superpowers. But there's also the small island states where you see competing claims. Of course, the South China Sea. There is the Mekong Delta, where you have the upstream situation where China is in the dominant seat, building dams. But then you have the downstream countries that could suffer from that. And then there's also tensions over migration, and also there is the role of Japan, for instance, being the biggest provider of the Just Energy Transition Partnership in Indonesia, and in Indonesia almost threatening to leave the Paris Agreement. So there's all these kind of dynamics, and I think the simple answer to your question, what could we do about it, is really step up the level of dialogue, and of course that's talk. But I've been in many situations where this has been undertaken, track 1.5 dialogues, track 2 dialogues. And what we really can observe is that it helps to take away the misunderstandings, that it helps to bring together branches of governments that normally don't talk to each other, to enhance an understanding among, for instance, security professionals about also the importance of addressing energy transition and climate adaptation policies, and also the regional organizations that exists, ASEAN, BIMSTEC, the Mekong River Commission, but also indeed the ADB and UNDP activities in the region. They all contribute, let's say, to these dialogues, standard setting in some specific fields, and also to sometimes, let's say, have a common understanding of how we can join up forces towards, let's say, the big powers in the region, which might sometimes be necessary to kind of organize some counterweight on some issues, and also draw some lines, let's say, with regard, for instance, to the Mekong region or other places. From Europe, from where I'm from, there is also this relatively new global gateway instrument that provides loans, and half of these investments are actually already going into the climate and energy space. And it's supposedly, Europe's answer to the Belt and Road initiatives, very much focused on infrastructure. And I think with regard to both adaptation but also mitigation, that's also, of course, a crucial field, because if you reinforce infrastructures, you usually also boost resilience of countries and in these strategic autonomies that I talked about before. So that's very necessary. With regard to migration, I think this is the most difficult aspect of the whole climate security interplay. There it's really about thinking smartly, where are people, and also urbanization, thinking about where are people going to live. Of course, what happened, for instance, in Pakistan with the floods, I think it was 2 years ago. They said, well, this is typically a case of extreme weather events caused by climate change. So there is a loss and damage case, and the richer countries should pay for it. And then the richer country said, yes, but you cut your forests, you build your houses in low-lying river basins. So I think, let's try to take a joint responsibility. Of course, also the richer countries, out of a solidarity perspective, ideally would pay. I think actually that the likelihood of them doing that is decreasing. That's why I also point to this new loans-based instrument, Global Gateway, because I think that's going to be, in all honesty, the future. But there's also this own responsibility of ministries of planning or urbanization planners to really think, do we really want to have these slums in certain places? Do we really have to build houses in deltas, low-lying coastal areas? Including, by the way, in my own country, they're still considering to build a new houses on 7 meters below sea level. 7 meters below sea level. Is that really a good idea? It's really about these issues, about boosting resilience, making sure that you have electricity during heat waves so that air conditioning keeps functioning, having good early warning for storm surges on the Bay of Bengal region or other places. And then, of course, also the early action and also the policies to reach the people and to evacuate the people in time. So it's really about all these kinds of things. And I think the most important, is to talk, to have these dialogues and to consider what you can do together. In Europe, we just did recently this Niinisto report from the former Finnish president. And this talked about, resilience to prepare for more hybrid threats and war situations, but also the resilience to climate change. And very often it's similar things that you need to do. It's basically about organizing your society, making people prepared, make sure that, people that can afford have some cash money, have some food and water supplies, have electricity, power banks, things like that. And I realize very much so that in parts of the Indo-Pacific, this is way more difficult to organize than, let's say, in my super organized country, the Netherlands, which is sometimes even over-organized. But this is, these are the things, that we have to consider. In the end of the day, of course, mitigation will still be the best way to address climate change, although its impact will not be immediate, as you all know very well. But I think the emphasis on, let's say, the part of the world that is still open for it and doesn't contest the climate science to push forward. And with the effects that we have seen, that the prices of the renewables came down and so on and so forth so much, and that it became more cost competitive. And I think we now, we can't afford to discuss, maybe green hydrogen is too expensive. Well, for some situations we need green hydrogen, so let's move on with it. Of course, there's risks with nuclear energy, but maybe we should still consider it as part of the energy mix from a low carbon perspective. So it's just, and let's avoid also that these fossil interests can lobby, let's say, against agendas, because it is a very strong force, and they have a strong ally now in the US again. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you, Luis-san, for your, again, the very insightful comment on these issues. And also, I just like the audience, if you have any particular question to these three panelists, please, pose your question on the Q&A box or chat box. So maybe you can take a few questions if time allows. So meanwhile, I'd like to ask another question to the Badri-san. So yeah, next question is regarding the critical mineral supply chain. So what measures should be taken to safeguard critical mineral supply chain from both climate risk and the shifting geopolitical issues? So these are next question to Badri-san.
Thank you, Katara-san. Definitely, critical mineral supply chain is a very crucial aspect of net zero transition. For example, in India, when there was a conscious move towards electric vehicles, the government started supporting providing subsidies, incentives, and so on for electric vehicles. One of the thought process at that point was to more than renewable energy transition, and so on. At that point, one of the policy drivers was reducing dependence on imports. So, since oil imports are the major part of India's import bill, so one of the points that policymakers had in mind was to reduce the dependence on imported oil and have electricity as a source for mobility. But then over time, we started realizing, and I had done some work on this a few years ago, where we found that purely from a trade perspective, you're only going to move from importing oil to importing batteries and solar panels. If you really want electricity to be, uh, uh, helping the net zero transition, green transition, and so on, you have to move towards renewable energy, and solar energy is one of the major parts of that. And you need solar panels, semiconductors, chips, and batteries, and all these different parts of this whole supply chain. And that's again going to be imported from other countries. So this is kind of a policy dilemma, and that is when the thought process for critical mineral supply chain started happening in the developing countries. So one aspect is to develop, the endowment is endowment. So if you have it, you have it. Otherwise, you have to import the endowment. But then you at least can develop the other supply chain capabilities. If you have the critical minerals, what can you do with that? So all these value addition processes and so on, they can be labor intensive. They can provide jobs. So we talk about this green jobs, the labor implications of energy transition. A large part of that can come from this supply chain, the critical mineral supply chain. If you can import critical minerals, and then if you import the critical minerals that you do not have, and then start adding value, doing the processing, and develop these products that are needed for the net zero transition. That can be quite employment generating as well. So I think one of the main aspects what I'm trying to say here is that you have to develop a strong domestic supply chain while being open to the imports from the rest of the world. So we should not be too excessively focused on just developing this domestic supply chain, but definitely that has to be part of the broader strategy. The broader strategy should be a combination of imports from allies and friendly countries, and at the same time developing the domestic value addition capabilities. And I think here there is another aspect to be considered. Again, going back to Indian example, some of the critical minerals are actually abundant in India, but they are actually not. The judiciary has actually banned some of them for ecological reasons because there was excessive mining of certain critical minerals, and that actually started affecting the ecosystem there, and the courts had to intervene, and they actually banned. So in some of our discussions when I was heading trade at Niti Aayog, we had some discussions with other countries, and they knew that India had supplies of certain critical minerals, but India was not mining them because of this ecological reason. So this is like a double-edged sword. So you need these critical minerals for net zero transition, but and sometimes this excessive dependence on these critical minerals also can pose a threat to the ecosystem. So how do we do this? Do that, and I think that we got a lot of guidance for the broader approach for this from some of these EU directives, right? So we have various aspects of sustainability, sustainability in forestry, sustainability in extraction sectors, mining. So if we can actually follow some of the sustainability practices in the supply chain in terms of mining and so on, then this double-edged sword situation can be changed. So I think this is where, again, going back to the previous point that I mentioned, there is a need for countries like the European Union and other advanced, even Australia for that matter, with all their mining technologies and so on. So they can actually help developing countries, Asian economies, to um, ensure that they can develop their critical mineral supply chain in a sustainable way so as to contribute to the net zero transition in an effective way. So I think these are some of the issues that I've looked at on the ground um, while trying to solve this net zero problem and looking at this critical mineral supply chain.
Thank you very much, Badri-san. And I think this is the last question to Luisa. So, and also thank you very much for sharing the link with the EU, the Indian Corporation on the critical mineral supply chain. Okay, so this is the last question to Luisa. So it said, with geopolitical rivalry intensifying, are there any specific diplomatic or security mechanism that can be leveraged to prevent climate-induced instability? Luisa, you have the floor.
Yeah, no, thank you. And maybe if you allow me, then I should just say a few things about these critical raw materials, because I would really like to echo what Badri Narayanan has said about the need for especially also this processing, because that's one of the bottlenecks where really the dominant position of China is excessively high, and that we need to put a counterweight to. And let's say not only from the perspective of dependencies and the threats that maybe the supplies of critical raw materials can be upheld, but also for just a healthy market conditions for the development of this sector. We need to have more competition in this space at the global level, and also alternative suppliers of critical raw materials, because this will be the way to have a healthy market development. That being said, I think I also would like to mention that I see the point about let's say the ecological impacts of mining, because by definition it's a very dirty and economically damaging sector. And we see also for that reason that in Europe, whether it's in Serbia with the lithium reserves, or at the border of Portugal and Spain, or in many places, it's almost inconceivable to open new mining activities. And if you do so, you have to really take it careful with regard to permitting. And in that regard, I was also putting my hopes very much on this Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive, on the due diligence CSDDD directive of the EU, because I was hoping that in combination with standards of, for instance, global gateway investments and so on, would help to, let's say, provide some alternative to, let's say, unsustainable mining practices that we see in the DRC and other places in the world. So to try to do it in a slightly different way. I mean, the idea that it can be completely, environmentally clean is maybe not in reach, but at least, to reduce, let's say, the damage that is being done to the environment would be great. But now I see indeed the pressure that Michael talked about. That there's a lot of pressure from the US and other places, and also from the EU's own private sector to reduce. And the Commission has already also published proposals to make these new EU standards less strong, and also the applicability to less companies and not so deep in the supply chain. So you have to make sure that your direct suppliers are sustainable, but then you don't have to check deeper in the supply chain anymore. Yeah, that's basically what the new proposals boil down to, if I looked at it. So I think that's in a way a missed opportunity. What is also necessary, I think, in the mining sector is that if other countries develop mining activities, that they also are given the opportunity to indeed take part in these steps deeper in the supply chain. If you just go to a third country, grab the resources and say goodbye, then indeed this is a neo-colonial, neo-imperialistic approach. And it also is eventually much better if, the countries with technologies and know-how or willingness to invest in the build-up of this know-how are joint venturing with private sector in other countries. If, let's say, not only the lithium is taken out, but also the battery factories built in that country, or the critical raw materials can be used in Ukraine for the defense industry, for instance. So I think that's also a new way of truly partnering and truly creating economic benefits. And then finally, on this issue of critical materials, also indeed just, circular economy, recycling. Also on recycling, there might be way more opportunities to cooperate and have partnerships between countries. And of course, the diversification. I mean, first we thought that you could only make batteries with lithium, but now you can also make them from cobalt and other substances. So really in the field of R&D and innovation, there's possibly way more opportunities also to consider this crucial question of energy storage and which technologies and critical raw materials are necessary for such clean tech. So I think also joint efforts and also Japan, which is of course a highly technological, innovative country, can help also in that regard. EU, Australia with know-how. So that's just to talk about that. Then to go back to your question about which security and diplomatic ways are there. Yeah, it's also to talk about such regimes, because it's not that these things happen overnight. You have to have good trade agreements to facilitate. You have to have agreements on intellectual property rights, provisions, sharing, and making sure that this is also adhered to. So again, I think I echo my earlier point, a need for dialogue, for talks about how these things can be operationalized, how infrastructures can become more connected, how stress tests can take place perhaps for these infrastructures and their safety and stability, or also stress testing these critical raw material supply chains. Many countries have lists now of which critical raw materials are truly critical, how critical they are, and for instance, have storage. At the European level, we now will have storage, and some of these, I don't know, neodymiums or these rare earths. You don't need to have huge oil tankers or supply spaces for that. You just need, a safety valve somewhere where you can store a few gram of this, or just minor amounts of these substances, and then you will have for 2 years in your supply chain of your factory what is necessary to continue to produce if something happens in that supply chain for geopolitical or other reasons. So yeah, in the foreign and policy and security world, we talk about confidence building measures. But essentially, this is also about, having the right phone connection to the person in charge to avoid that this one is pushing on the red button for the nukes, or, so it's about having the relationships in place, having the dialogue structures there, having the standards in place, and trying to operationalize the things you agreed upon, because that's I think one of the fallacies if you look at ASEAN or others, that there's a lot of good intentions, a lot of declarations, but sometimes not, let's say, the capacities to keep and the willingness to really follow up and follow through. And I guess that's where a lot of gains can be made. Yeah, I think I'll stop here. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much all the panelists on answering this series of questions. But I got one question from the audience. So if some of you can answer to that question, is wonderful. So the question said, could you give us your insight on deep seabed mining for energy security, because it is considered to pose a huge threat to deep sea ecosystem if we don't have any environmental impact assessment. So it's also related to somehow we just discussed the importance of sustainability aspect on the critical minerals. So if you have any insight or thought on this issue, please share your views.
Maybe if I can go first, because I also have to leave in 3 minutes. Since I'm in Delhi, there will be a taxi, and I have to move on. And I hope that I can still listen a little bit to what Michael and Badria might have to say. I know that there is this off the coast of Indonesia, Papua Guinea. There is this effort to do deep sea mining, and I think it's hugely concerning. And this is something where perhaps in, I don't know, Guinea or other places, we have to talk about, we see more and more issues where there is just not a proper global governance regime. Garbage in space and AI are often the ones mentioned, but I think deep sea mining is really the other one. And maybe, let's say, a new multilateral effort is not geopolitically realistic to achieve at this moment in time. But then maybe with a coalition of the willing, we should still set standards, and then maybe some countries will not adhere to it in the short term, but at least you have standards that might have some effect and will also be the benchmark for researchers, NGOs, and so on, just to say what is acceptable and what is kind of not acceptable. I think it will happen, but you can at least try to think about norms and let's say how you view it from a reasonable and also from a precautionary principle approach. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is another kind of emerging issue for us. So thank you very much, Lisa, on give us your insight. Okay, so it's on time. So thank you very much all the panelists. Michael-san and Badri-san from States, even though it is very late. And also Luis-san, it's and from the Netherlands, it is a very early morning in your country. So thank you very much for your participation, and thank you very much for your very insightful comment or input to this the webinar. Okay, so thank you very much. I'd like to close this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so next move on to the next session, which will be chaired by Nanda Kumar.
Thank you, Dr. Tamra, and I would like to express our sincere appreciation to all the speakers and audience staying back Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank the previous speakers for this wonderful, extremely thought-provoking insights. Now, this session, we will have 4 different presentations. And this session will focus on, this is a sort of a regional focus. And this will be on climate security and energy and resource security in this Asia Pacific region. We have 4 speakers, Mr. Hajime Takizawa, who is a policy researcher from IGES. We have Professor Bhim Shrestha, a professor from Kathmandu University. We also have 2 colleagues joining from UNDP office in Bangkok, in place of a colleague who was supposed to join, Ms. Yamamoto. The 2 colleagues who will be joining are Ms. Yin Chang and Mr. Tomokazu Serisawa. And we also have from representing Pacific Islands, we have Dr. Ravita Prasad, who is an academician from the Fiji University. Now, let me turn to Mr. Hajime Takizawa for his first presentation. Takizawa-san will speak on climate security and energy transition in East Asia, with a little bit focus on energy policies of Japan. Takizawa-san, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nan-san. Let me share my screen. Can you see my slide? Nan-san.
Yes, we can. You can make it actually in the full screen. Okay, we can see that. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Hajime Takizawa, Climate and Energy Area, IGS. In this climate security project, our team is researching energy security. Climate security is a new term, but energy security has been discussed for a long time. Japan is an island country with limited natural resources. So energy security has been one of the top priorities in the history. During the Arab-Israeli War of the 1970s, oil countries reduced production, and Japan suffered from oil shortage. And during the World War II, why Japan went to war with the United States and went to Southeast Asia? One of the reasons is energy security. In this context, energy means fossil fuels, which has CO2 emissions. So in order to achieve the Paris Agreement and carbon neutrality in 2050, fossil fuels must be switched to decarbonize new energies, such as hydrogen and ammonia. In this energy transition, which country will be rich in the new energies, and with which countries Japan should develop diplomatic relations are reviewed in my presentation. Japan's energy self-sufficiency is the 37th among the 38 OECD countries, only 13%. Japan's primary energies are supplied from renewables and nuclear power. Back in 2010, Japan's self-sufficiency ratio was 20%. But after the Fukushima accident, all the nuclear power plants stopped operation. The ratio dropped significantly. Currently, some nuclear power plants passed the new safety requirements and restarted. Renewable energies are increasing, so the ratio is increasing gradually, but not reaching the pre-accident levels. This low energy self-sufficiency ratio means Japan have to depend on foreign imports. This slide shows Japan's dependence on imported oil, gas, and coal, and from which countries Japan is importing. Almost all the fossil fuels are imported from foreign countries. The left graph shows oil, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar. 94% of imports surrounded by the blue line comes from the Middle East. So political stability in the Middle East is essential for oil supplies. Gas and coal are mainly imported from Asia Pacific countries, colored in pink. Especially Australia ranks first in both gas and coal. For stable supply, maintaining the diplomatic relations with these countries and diversification of supply chain are important. Japan's fossil fuel depends on imports, so international affairs and exchange rate of Japanese yen have significant impacts. This graph shows how fossil fuel prices increased by the Ukraine war in 2022. The blue line shows international oil price. The orange line and green line show Japan imported energy and coal price. Fuel prices increased, and at the same time, the Japanese yen lost its value. So imported fuel prices became more expensive than before. The prices have recently dropped from the peak, but compared to the pre-war levels, they are still high. When the Ukraine war happened, the Japanese government studied energy dependence on Russia. Japan has a border with Russia, but not so dependent on Russia for energy supply. Oil 1%, natural gas 9%, and coal 6%. On the other hand, Italy and Germany are more dependent on Russia. Especially Germany is severely affected by the interruption of energy supplies from Russia. Russia is the top trading partner in oil, gas, and coal. But Germany's primary energy self-sufficiency is 35%, much better than Japan's 13%. For Japan, with a low energy sufficiency ratio, one way to strengthen energy security is to develop Japan's own oil fields, gas fields, and coal mines. If Japan has the ownership and mining rights, stable supply is possible compared to just one-time trading. It's called independent development ratio. In 2016, coal is 61%, oil and gas 27%. The government is to increase this ratio for energy security. The seventh strategic energy plan targets maintaining 60% for coal and increasing to over 60% for oil and gas in 2040. So far, I have been talking about fossil fuels, but fossil fuels must be reduced for 2050 net zero. The left graph shows Japan's CO2 emissions and how to decarbonize them. In the consumer sector, industry sector, transportation sector, and the power sector, energy transition will progress. In this process, hydrogen will play an important role. The right graph shows decarbonization in the power sector. Fossil fuels will be reduced, and hydrogen and ammonia will replace. The left graph shows Japan's annual imports of fossil fuels. About 30 trillion Japanese yen are paid for foreign countries in 1 year. The government's tax revenue is 70 trillion yen, so 30 trillion is big money. Coal and gas are mainly coming from Australia, and oil from the Middle East countries. Coal and gas will be switched to hydrogen. The right graph shows application of hydrogen in various industries. Hydrogen itself can be used for gas power plants, steel plants, and by combining CO2, it can be used for gas demand, automobiles, chemical plants, and airplanes. And by combining nitrogen, ammonia can be used for coal power plants and fertilizer demand. Oil imports will also be reduced, but the government sees oil as the last resort. The table below shows domestic fuel reserve stock. Natural gas in the tank disappears little by little by its nature, so stock days are 20 days. Coal is easy to stock, just put it on a coal yard. but it needs a huge space. Japan is a small country, so stock days are 29 days. On the other hand, oil is 200 days. During the Arab-Israeli War of the 1970s, Japan established the National Oil Reserve System. Oil tanks are owned by the government. So the government says oil is the last resort. For uranium, Japan has 2.9 years stock. Uranium is the most resilient fuel. So in the seventh energy plan, the government says Japan uses both renewables and nuclear as much as possible. This graph shows hydrogen production cost by each technology, current cost and future cost. Vertical range shows regional differences. Some countries are expensive and others are cheap. The right-hand side is green hydrogen using renewables. They are more expensive than using fossil fuels, left-hand side. So the most economical way of hydrogen production is to use fossil fuels. But in Japan, natural gas and coal is not available. So hydrogen, either gray or blue, must be imported from foreign countries. The left graph shows the government's hydrogen supply target. Currently, hydrogen supply is 2 million tons made by domestic byproducts from petrochemical plants. The government's hydrogen strategy is to increase production tenfold to 20 million tons by 2050. The right graph shows how to supply hydrogen. By 2050, hydrogen by domestic electrolysis will increase, but not so produced in large quantities. So which country will become hydrogen suppliers to Japan? This figure shows hydrogen exporting countries to Japan according to the IEA report. The countries circled in red will be potential exporters to Japan based on announcements of hydrogen projects. Australia and the United States will be main suppliers. Hydrogen supply chain projects are ongoing with Japan. These countries are currently working on the project or planning with Japan. There will be more countries on this list. So which countries will be involved with Japan's energy diplomacy? METI has conducted an analysis. For energy diplomacy, METI grouped into 25 target countries. The orange circle shows traditional fossil fuel suppliers. Blue shows rare earth minerals. And green shows new fuels such as hydrogen and ammonia. Some countries are rich in one type of energy, and other countries rich in two types. The countries in the middle of three circles are rich in fossil fuel, minerals, and new fuels. I don't see Russia and China in this concept map made by METI. Russia is rich fossil fuels and minerals. And China is also rich in fossil fuels, minerals, and new fuels as well. So depending on the diplomatic relations and cost effectiveness, Japan may trade energy with Russia and China. So what kind of approach should Japan take with these 25 countries? METI showed 5 categories. Category 1 is comprehensive partner. They have various natural resources. Japan collaborates and establishes market rules and supply chains. Category 2 is a traditional stable supplier. Japan continues energy trade and extends it into new fuels. Category 3 is developing countries with potential for natural resources. Japan builds investment infrastructure. Category 4 is a regional partner, neighboring Asian countries. Japan leads regional partnership on energy. Category 5 is emerging superpower. They have huge growth opportunities. Japan develops their domestic markets and supplies new fuels to Japan. These are Japan's energy diplomacy for energy security and energy transition. For wrap up, Japan has very limited natural resources, so relies entirely on imports for fossil fuels. Decarbonized society will transition from fossil fuels to low carbon hydrogen. In a hydrogen society, Japan's hydrogen supply will rely on foreign imports. Japan will develop its energy diplomacy not only with traditional fossil fuel exporters, but also exporters of new fuels and rare earth minerals. That's all for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Takizawa-san, for your illuminating presentation. I'll have some observations, but I'll have some questions that I'll share with you later. Now, let me move to the next presentation by Professor Bhim Prasad Shrestha. Professor Bhim Shrestha is a professor at the Kathmandu University in Nepal, and is also affiliate professor at the University of Washington, US. Professor Shrestha, you have 15 minutes.
Okay. So, thank you. Very good afternoon. Somewhere in good morning also. For providing me this wonderful opportunity to have some discussion on the topics like climate security challenge in Asia, Pacific, security, energy, and trade and transitions. In fact, my presentation I have divided into two sectors. One purely on the basis of the policies that is related to South Asia. Though I represent, I'm affiliated to different universities in Thailand and US, but I personally today I represent Nepal, and that too is the South Asia. So I will be talking more on the South Asian regions, how we are trying to work on and how we will do it. Yeah. Okay. So South Asia stands at the crossroads of climate disaster, energy insecurity, and resource conflicts threaten stability. That threatens stability because resource is a constraint in the South Asia. Okay, but there is a hope to have resilient energy transitions that will create a stable energy supply system in South Asia. So this is a topic that I like to discuss, highlight on how South Asia is emerging in terms of balancing the energy needs, demands, and supply systems, and having the political differences and some different regional disparities, how we could achieve the energy sustainability in these regions. Next. Okay. So if you see in South Asia, there are mainly South Asian regional entities. If you see, there are three major regional entities you can see: SARC, South Asian Regional Corporations. Two is a BIMSTEC, and third is ICMOD, International Center for Mountain Development. So if you see the SARC is a South Asian Association Regional Corporation starting from the Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. These are the countries in the SARC. But somehow I will comment later on why the SARC could not work well because of this regional rivalryism between India and Pakistan. It's created a very difficult scenario for SARC to function well. So eventually the BIMSTEC has emerged. BIMSTEC, as just now we heard a voice from the Netherlands, as the BIMSTEC has become really vibrant in our regions where Bay of Bengal, the economic corridor, has created a passage for a lot of trade and transits. And talking about ICMOD, International Center for Mountain Developments, that is mostly, this part is the highest peaks of the world, that is Himalayan, Hindu Kush Himalayan regions. So ICMOD, basically science and technology-based institutions that works on the developing the technology that is suitable for Hindu Kush Himalayan regions. So these are the three major, I can say, the regional entities that governs the regional technological, economical, and trade balances as a as a regional sectors. So my presentation, I will basically try to see in this first part is examine how regional cooperation, adaptive infrastructure, integrated policy can secure South Asian future, focus on vulnerability, energy challenges, and solution. So if you see the South Asia, because I know I have studied Japan, but in Japanese context, we normally talk about as the neighboring sectors and its economic giants and mites are very much distributed and located in adjacent to Japanese border. So the South Asian regions is now emerging powerhouse where the 1.9 billion populations is existing, where 70% exposed to climate risks. That is the World Bank 2023 report says more than 70%, because South Asian regions represents lowest part in the earth to the very highest peak of mountain. So that is very much threatened by the climate crisis. Annual economic losses from disaster that is happening, that is a climate crisis triggered disaster is creating more than $15 billion as per the UNESCAP's report 2022. You can see in 2022, there was huge flood in Pakistan that displaced more than 33 million people in 2022. Himalayan glacier melts, that is a 40% retreat by 225 and treating water for more than 240 million people. That is a report from the ICMO. That eventually triggers the severe skewed food insecurity, migration, and that's threatened regional cases. So this is a kind of unstable kind of a geopolitical situation that is existing in South Asian regions triggered by the climate crisis. The energy insecurity, we are talking about energy insecurity. 70% energy is from fossil fuel. 40 million lacks electricity. It's a 2023 report, as you can see, IEA. India is, of course, is an emerging country, but it has a more than 55% is a coal dependency. That is climatically very disastrous. Rising demand of 4% annual growth and climate disruption, hydropower output fell 20% in 2022 due to drought. This is IPCC report in 2008. So what I'm trying to see is that the conventional renewable energy sources that is highly susceptible due to climate crisis, that is hydropower, is no more, is of course dependable, but no more dependable in future. That is being replaced by solar and wind energy. And solar energy is extensively coming up, both in agriculture as well as other industries. Okay. Another is a transborder resource complex that you can see. We have several countries politically divided by resource share countries. If you see the India and Pakistan, the Indus, Ganges, and Brahmaputra, these are the rivers that is located in the highly geographically fictitious areas, but we share the common resources. As you can see, Indus Basin, Pakistan and India has to work together in order to tap the energy from these Indus Basin. That is a huge potential for irrigating in Punjab regions. India and Pakistan both have the same shared cultural and agricultural practices. Similarly, upstream demand will reduce hydropower potential in a downstream. Upstream, as you can see, the upstream of Himalaya is a Tibetan plateaus. That is most of the watershed area for feeding the entire the rivers that is flowing through Brahmaputra, and that is creating another conflict that is within a transbounding resources. And there is a cooperative resource management to prevent conflict and ensure energy stability. You can see in these pictures, the countries are divided, but resources are shared and countries are in a very situation. So this is a transboundary resource conflict is one of the major crises in our regions. Then we have some sort of, as a matter of fact, I happen to see some of the possibilities of switching into the renewable energy. That is low carbon, that would create low carbon footprints and reduce reliance on a fossil fuel is one of the major challenges. As we can see, India is now trying very hard. As we saw, that Japan is trying to work in hydrogen and other sources of energy. India is also now trying to work on other sources of fuel other than fossil fuel. Okay. So as a solution, as I was discussing, like as a solution, what could be the solution? In spite of the differences and difficulties, as we moved from SHARC to the BIMSTEC, there is a urgent need for establishing regional cooperations, like a shared threats like a flood and drought need to combat it together, as well as harnessing the resources from rivers and other cross-country grids, electric grids are being developed. The SHARC energy grid, that is one of the new development that is happening, that the electricity is now, the Bhutan is selling electricity to India, Nepal is selling electricity to Bangladesh through the SHARC electric grids that has been developed. Similarly, we need to have some sort of a South Asian climate energy alliances and joint form transport renewable projects has to be developed in order to ensure the regional prosperity and energy in order to combat energy insecurity in our regions. The number two solutions could be the climate adaptive infrastructures. As you can see, the Bangladesh has developed 20 megawatt floating solar plot zones. That is one of the latest development. You can see the Bangladesh is coming up with a huge infrastructure in order to harness the renewable energy. India has developed more than 1 lakh microgrids for electrified remote areas. That India is working on that. And more than 50% of fuel outage during a disaster. This is where the World Bank has reported that a disaster mitigation through joint initiative and joint collaboration is working on. So as of recently held in COP26 in Azerbaijan, that you have seen there more than this here. Okay, this is integrated policies needs to be developed. I have to move faster. Some of the overcoming barriers, and this is the conclusions. I just like to see the South Asian resiliency lies in the cooperation, innovation, and inclusive policy that can turn climate threats into opportunities. And some of the recommendation, government leads with a bold regional strategy, global partnership, invest in the South Asian green futures. These are some of the conclusions that we have done recently. And this is recently the Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of United Nations, happened to visit Kathmandu. And he was there and he has said that the climate crisis knows no borders, neither solutions. So we should have a common strategy in order to combat this one. Now, I have come up here with the two approaches that Kathmandu University we have taken, how we can use electric power or solar energy in agriculture sector. I will move faster. This is a CO2 emissions, that is a contribution that is being made by Nepal, but Nepal is facing major threats and challenges posed by the CO2 footprints. And what we are trying to do is, this one is, we are trying to use solar power, solar energy to charge a battery. And these batteries could be installed in tractors. And these tractors has been developed and has been installed in Nepal and India. So you can see some of the initiative. This is a tractor that has been developed that runs. Of course, electric vehicles is coming up very highly, but the per capita automobiles is very low in our regions. So having used electric vehicle doesn't solve the carbon footprint. So how we are trying to do is tractors needs to be electrified and powered, and that batteries needs to be charged by using solar energy. So this is coming up. So this solar power agriculture, that be it in the irrigation sector or post-harvest technology or any other sectors, these solar energy is replacing the conventional hydropower sector in India and Nepal. So this is how the tractors are being powered. This is a trend of tractors both in India and Nepal. This is one of the studies that some of our students did as a part of their master's degree. And we are trying to establish, yes?
It is electric tractor?
No, it's not a tractor. It is the tractors in India and Nepal. This is rapidly growing up. And tractor is not only the power for cultivations or preparing the soil, but it is a power source that is placed in scattered way in the rural areas where farmers can make use of those electric power. So conclusion is that this is let's see my. Transit electric vehicle in agriculture offers a viable solution to reduce greenhouse gas emission and combat climate change. For Nepal, adopting EVs align with the national strategies for sustainable development and environment conservation. And collaborative efforts between the government, private sector, and farming communities are essential to drive this sector. So, Asian Development Bank recently has launched the massive program in Nepal in order to electrify agriculture. So, starting from irrigation sector, now the ADB is moving on to establish the electric power, post-harvest, agriculture, tractor mechanizations, and all these things. So Nepal can be a hub or can be the exemplary conditions where it could be multiplied and effective on other parts of the South Asian regions as well. So another areas that we try to work on is how we could recycle or reduce the make use of the plastics. Because of course, the use of plastics has not been so extensive as in the other Asia Pacific regions, as in the Philippines and other countries, but it is growing. So this plastic use, approximately 82 million of plastic waste are mismanaged annually with 6 million tons in rivers and oceans all over the world. This is a global scenario of the plastic waste. And in Nepal context, in Nepalese context, plastic waste is only 12% so far. Organic waste is high, and these organic waste are being used for converting into the biogas and other sources of energy, whereas the plastics remains one of the major contributor to that is collected in a dumping sites. So how we could segregate the plastics, and this plastic could be converted into the useful resources as a reduce, recycle, and as a circular economy theory. So we like to make sure that these plastics could be used to make some sort of useful products. So the government policy has been developed in all the policies that is a plastic has to be well segregated from the waste, and it should not go into dumping sites. This is one of the good examples that we have started. Of course, not a very long, but the road has been built with the plastic waste. These plastic wastes are collected, and with some chemical composition and some modifications, these plastics has been converted into pavement in the road conditions. Yeah. So addressing plastic waste requires a multifaceted approach involving community engagement, policy enforcement, and sustainable practices. By adopting innovative solutions and strengthening waste management system, Nepal can mitigate environmental impact on plastic pollutions. So, yes, I just finished on time, so I'll move a little faster. So this is a type of the two examples that we try to create how the plastic waste can be solved by learning not only from within the South Asian region, but the learning from the lessons from the Philippines. Particularly, Philippines has a huge problem of plastics, and they have overcome with the support from World Bank. They have recently received more than $300 million in order to combat this plastic waste. So we are trying to approach how the Philippines has done this plastic problem solving, and that could be adopted to South Asian regions. So,
okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bhim Shrestha, for highlighting the South Asian region's vulnerability to climate impacts, and also the vulnerability of the energy systems in the region, and how innovatively Nepal is trying to address some of these issues. Thank you so much for highlighting that. I'll come back with some questions later. Now, let me move to the next speaker. We have two speakers joining from UNDP office, Ms. Ying Chang. She's a regional energy specialist with UNDP, and she's joined by Mr. Tomokazu Serizawa, who is a regional climate security specialist. So they both jointly make this presentation. Ms. Ying Chang and Mr. Serizawa, over to you. You kindly stick to 15 minutes if possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. Great pleasure joining you today. It's a very important and very timely discussion of this topic. In UNDP, we would like to share with you our perspectives, very much anchored around development as a development organization, our work focuses on how the renewable energy transition, and climate security work all contribute to development and open up development opportunities for people, especially people from different communities, vulnerable groups as well. So first of all, I'll take a brief overlook of the energy landscape in Southeast Asia. If you go to next slide, please. Yes. As we all know, the region has been one of the most economically, socially, and culturally dynamic regions in the world, who has seen fast economic growth over the past decades, which very much drives the energy demand. If you look at the numbers, its share in global energy demand increased from 11% in 2010, which will be predicted to be reached 25% by 2035. It will more than double the share of total energy demand in the world, and that is very much driven by economic growth, the growth in population, fast industrialization, including manufacturing and industrial capacity production, and also urbanization. And more recently, the rising temperatures caused by climate change, which will lead to the increased use of air conditioning, which again adds pressure to electricity demand. And so far, most of this growing demand has been supplied by fossil fuels, which has accounted for more than 80% of the total energy demand for this region since 2010. And similar to South Asia region, coal has been playing a very important role and has been used as the most flexible and affordable sources for energy generation, which caused a lot of environmental issues, including CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, but also air pollution. There's data showing that 85% of the population living in this region is exposed to air pollution. And on the positive side, the region has also made tremendous progress in terms of investments in renewable energy, including its manufacturing, its supply chains, and also deployment of renewable energy in the energy system. And more recently, the EVs, electric vehicles, and batteries as well, based on its abundant reserve. There's data showing that from 2019, the renewable energy sector has already produced more than 85,000 jobs in this region, which you can see there's huge opportunities being generated there. If you look at the next slide, please. This chart from the International Energy Agency showing that, I think it's a little bit small, sorry for that, but it's showing that the region is trying to decouple its GDP growth from the CO2 emissions, and it is possible. But to reach that, to really achieve the pledges, net zero pledges made by countries, the investments in renewables, including solar, wind, and other sources of renewable energy, will need to double by 2035. And that means that huge investment will be needed, not just in manufacturing supply chains, but also in modernization and upgrading of the grids, and also the energy storage systems in order to better integrate more renewable energy and also at the same time ensure the secure, stable, and flexible supply of energy. If you look at the next slide, please. So what does this mean for climate security? We believe that transition to clean energy, if managed properly, can contribute positively to climate resilience. As a few speakers have already mentioned, increasing the share of renewable energy can reduce reliance on imported fossil fuels, which also can mitigate the risk to price fluctuations caused by global markets and geopolitics. And also decentralized renewable energy can help bring energy access to the remote areas, rural areas, local communities, and people living in small islands. All this kind of renewable energy can then also improve the livelihoods of the people and also open up development opportunities. If you look at the number and the figure here, I think two particular sectors, renewable energy manufacturing and electric vehicles, have been bringing a lot of economic development opportunities to this region in particular, based on this competitive advantage. And also a few countries, for example, Indonesia and Thailand, have set ambitious targets to become the regional hub for electric vehicles and also battery manufacturing. Let me stop here and hand it over to my colleague Tomo to continue the presentation.
Thank you so much. Can you move on to the next slide? Yes, so from my side, I want to focus on climate security dimension, while my colleague Ian already highlighted the so-called energy or energy transition or energy security part. But what do you mean by climate security? There are so many actually definitions on climate security. Many agencies, many experts have been involved and came up with so many definitions. So I want to present just two out of many today. One is this very simple definition about climate-related security risks, which are understood as excessive adverse impacts of climate change on national security or security of the state, international security or international peace. And the third dimension is human security. You know, in the so-called climate security discourse, we often miss this human security dimension, usually focusing on the national security or international security, but not many actually talk about or highlight it, human security dimension. Especially we consider human security consists of these 7 elements. The first one, economic, including energy, critical minerals, natural resources, and food, health, environmental, personal, community, and political security. Unless we, whenever we talk about policy making, research, or actions, then without considering these human security dimensions, then we can't really address the whole dimension of the climate security risks. And also, we are considering, these are the elements which are precursor to the national security hazards or even international security hazards. So we really need to consider these dimensions when it comes to these policy making and others. Please, next. This is another definition of climate security. From UNDP Climate Dictionary. This is one of our flagship knowledge products, which is available online, English, Japanese, and other languages as well. So please refer to that later. But in this dictionary, climate security is defined, so-called referring to evaluating, managing, and reducing the risks to peace and stability brought on by the climate crisis. This means ensuring that climate mitigation and adaptation goes beyond doing no harm and contributes positively to peace and stability. My personal understanding or impression from this, it's not really exactly the definition of climate security, but rather kind of statement how UNDP is engaged in the climate security risks and how to approach, how to address these challenges. And in fact, UNDP's climate security approach evolves around these 4 dimensions or so-called streams. The first one, climate-proof conflict prevention and peace building. The second approach ensures that mitigation and adaptation are peace positive. The third stream integrates climate action and sustaining peace. So these first and second will be combined together. The fourth dimension or stream is to strengthen cross-border regional and sub-regional approaches as an international organization, and we are in a good position to address this so-called cross-border approach. Please, next. Yes, so this describes typical so-called climate-induced energy security risks in the region, Southeast Asia. And I categorize 4 major risks in the region. The first one, climate changes disrupted already energy infrastructure, especially like power plants, transmission lines, and refineries, oil refineries in the coastal area by typhoons, flooding, and even the sea level rise. Like Philippines, Vietnam already witnessed or being challenged by these climate changes impacting this infrastructure. The second challenge is hydropower vulnerability, already impacted in Laos and Vietnam and Myanmar by climate changes because of the changing rainfall patterns. Also, actually, in Myanmar, the river comes from Himalayan region, and the glacial melt has already started impacting, and the river flow changes as well. So those are already impacting hydropower plants in those countries. The third flow is a rising energy demand and heat waves, which talks about basically the situation in the big cities like Bangkok, Jakarta, and others. And the increased cooling needs is the biggest challenge in those cities. The fourth stream is geopolitical risks, mainly because of water scarcity in some regions, particularly in the Mekong region. Upper stream countries versus lower stream countries already dropped tension among these countries. How to mitigate these challenges, how to adapt to these challenges? Mainly, we come up with these 2 generic strategies, but very important strategies. The first one, already previous speakers emphasized, basically diversifying energy sources with more renewable energies. In this region, potential of solar, wind, and even geothermal is there. So we really need to look into those. The second one, enhancing regional energy cooperation. I think there are some already cases in the region, and I'm also encouraged to hear that from South Asia examples already, these regional energy cooperation are already expanding there as well. But we really need to amplify this in the Southeast Asia. Please, next. So over to you.
Yes, thank you, Tomo. So what do we do in this area? There's a few areas that we focus on. The first one is linking energy and climate priorities at the strategic levels. For example, all the 10 countries in ASEAN have included energy in their NDCs. And many of the countries also set ambitious targets for renewable energy or for EV deployment. But it's important to ensure that the energy targets and policies are in line with their NDCs, and energy and climate policies can work hand in hand and to improve policy coherence at different levels, including across different ministries, policy domains, but also between the national and subnational level policy making as well. And second is to support just energy transition, because just energy transition covers a whole wide spectrum of policy and sectors. We kind of offer our support, policy support, cutting across not just energy, but also climate mitigation, adaptation, security, inclusive growth, supply chains, health, and gender as well. One example, I think, is many countries here are faced with the challenge of skills development, although they have been trying to build local capacity, productive capacity for EVs, EV battery, but they need to have a skilled labor force to meet this demand and also to harness these opportunities arising from EVs and renewable energy. So one thing that we can support is to help develop and design upscaling and reskilling programs to help people from different communities, women, youths, to access such kinds of training programs. And also, we pilot and promote renewable energy projects, EVs, including policy and regulatory framework, and also energy efficiency, which will be a very important part of as well to reach net zero. And also,
let me jump on to this
please.
point only. So in the region, we have already conducted so-called climate security assessment or research in those countries, Indonesia, Philippines, Myanmar. UNDP has administered this research. And with the partnering with RSIS, the institute in Singapore, and also administered by our sister agency, DPPA, UNEP, and UNDP to support this regional climate security assessment in Southeast Asia. This was also published. And just for information, although it's not related to Southeast Asia, but with the IGIS and ICIMOD, we are targeting Hindu Kush Himalayan region climate security assessment. Already we conducted so-called country level roundtable consultations in Pakistan, Nepal, India, and we are hopeful that we will target in Afghanistan as well. So this is our current status, but we are also hopeful to reach the other Southeast Asian countries for this type of assessment work. Thank you. Oh,
yes, I think we can wrap up now. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ying and Tomo for this wonderful presentation and also highlighting the climate security challenges in the region and also sharing the UNDP's initiatives. I'll come back with some questions later. Now, let me move to the next speaker, Professor Ravida Prasad. She's an academician from the Fiji National University. She's going to present today on the nexus of energy and climate security in the Pacific Island countries. Thank you, Professor Ravida, for joining. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor, and hello to everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank IGES for inviting me to this very important workshop and giving me the opportunity to talk about energy security and climate security in Pacific Island countries. So as you can see from the slide, Pacific Island countries, we are small island developing countries, and we have got small land area, but surrounded by large ocean. And we have got population around 12 million, but 98% of them are concentrated in the Melanesia group. 1.5% are in the Polynesia, and the remaining are in the Micronesia group. So the outline for today's presentation, try to define climate security and energy security, which I think many previous speakers have already spoken on that. And then I will look at the climate security threats in Pacific, the energy landscape, energy security issues, and trying to see what are the linkages between the two and what could be some policy recommendations. So as the UNDP just highlighted now that climate security, it refers to the impact of climate crisis on peace and security of a particular fragile setting, in this case, Pacific Island countries. And energy security, there are many definitions that you would find in literature, but it's mostly to do with affordability, accessibility, availability, and resilience of energy systems to external threats. And for us in the Pacific, we could term it as low vulnerability of vital energy systems. So the climate security threats in the Pacific, I mentioned two events here: rising sea level and extreme weather events. Rising sea level are causing coastal erosion and flooding. Extreme weather events such as cyclones again are bringing in high winds, damaging the infrastructure. There are long periods of drought that is also adversely affecting the water and food issues. When there is cyclones, it comes with flooding, and so you have got health issues as well coming up there. And so basically, it all these climatic events or extreme weather events is leading to, as Elia stated, to the national security, to the human security, which I think is very important, the life and livelihoods of people. And if a cyclone hits a Pacific Island country, 20 to 60% of the country's GDP would be in the economic damages there. So it's a big chunk of money. Showing some pictures on tropical cyclone Winston that hit PG in 2016, 20th February. And I think this was the biggest, largest Category 5 cyclone that made landfall in Fiji and overall Pacific as a whole. And when that event occurred, 80% of the nation's population lost power because of the transmission lines and the distribution lines were all damaged, as well as we lost 44 lives. There were damages done to the homes as well as to the forest. Health facilities and schools were all destroyed. And of course, flooding accompanied that event. So overall estimated damage was around 1.42 billion Fijian dollars, which is equivalent to around 700 million US dollars. Now coming on to the energy landscape for the Pacific Island countries. So majority of the Pacific Island countries are very ambitious. They are targeting almost 100% renewable electricity generation by year 2020, some had said 2025 or 2030. And also some of the Pacific Island countries are also saying 100% electricity access. And few are also mentioning energy efficiency improvement. But if we look at the real situation on the share of electricity generation from renewables, apart from Fiji and Samoa, the rest of the island countries, the share of renewables in their electricity generation is very less than 25, which means that they are burning fossil fuels and are highly dependent on these imported costly fossil fuels. In terms of electricity access, if you look at the last three columns, so majority of the Pacific Island countries are having good electricity access, but then you need to see what level of electricity access there is. We are small island states which have got little islands. So you would say, yes, they have electricity access, but they would have solar home systems. So that would just provide basic lighting. So the users, the people in the remote islands or communities, they would not be enjoying the same level of energy service as someone on the main island. So that disparity is there. There's a big disparity we would see in clean cooking energy access. This is something that we are currently researching about, and this is very untapped area in the Pacific. We see that there is a big disparity between urban and rural clean cooking energy access. Nationally as well, there is less access to clean cooking energy. What households are dependent on is fossil fuels, or not fossil fuels, but I would say wood, biomass. And when these cyclones, what happens to the people? How do they cook food? Because they cannot go out, the wood is wet. So I did one project last year, and while talking to some NGO in Tuvalu, the lady mentioned that biogas digesters was very helpful in the household cooking food for their family, because there was no supply of wood. The rain came and wet all the wood. So it was, I think, renewable energy then played a big part in terms of uh, being resilient there. So apart from electricity generation and household cooking energy, there is also transport sector, which is consuming a lot of energy. If we look at the overall energy consumption of a Pacific Island country, land transport and maritime transport included. Because of course we need to have the different islands connected, and so this maritime transport plays a big role. The pie chart on the right hand side is just showing for Fiji's case, the average fossil fuel retained import into the country, looking at 2005 to 2017 data. So on average, Fiji imports around 500, or retains fossil fuel import of around 540 million liters at a cost of 634 million Fijian dollars. And this is a huge chunk of the GDP. You can see here on this slide the fossil fuel import as a percentage of GDP in 2015. It ranges for the different island countries from 5 to 16%, but on average there is like 10%. But this is 2015, probably it may have gone up if one looks at the recent figures. So the energy security issues in the Pacific Island countries, we are still highly dependent on fossil fuels. We have got limited access to electricity and clean cooking energy access. There is high energy cost, as well as vulnerability to energy price shocks and extreme weather events. The nexus of so how are energy security and climate security linked? So I'm trying to capture it here, trying to tell a story. So if we start, I think this dot means right. So if we start from the top, climate change, it adversely impacts the energy system. How? Availability of the resources. So climate change, if there is drought, what happens to the hydropower sources? If there is high temperature, what happens to the performance of the solar photovoltaics? Many of the Pacific Island countries, we are blessed with the good solar resource. And so solar is one technology that can be widely adopted by the countries. If the temperature increases, that would create a high demand of electricity on the grid. Last year, we saw very high temperatures in our countries. And so the grid would then have to rely on burning more fossil fuels. And also the cyclones or the flash flooding that are happening, what impact does it have on transmission and distribution lines? if the renewable energy systems that are already installed, if they are not climate resilient, there would be damages to that. So all those are having adverse impact on the energy system. And our energy system, we are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. So that means we are burning fossil fuels, releasing greenhouse gas emissions, causing climate change. But of course, our emission is negligible compared to global emissions. So Pacific Island countries, the leaders, we are committed to decarbonizing our energy sector and through renewable and energy efficiency measures. And that would lead to resilient communities better able to adapt to climate change as well as mitigate climate change. And what do we need for decarbonizing our energy sector? We need systems that are climate resilient. We need financing because of our limited economy, and the cost of renewable energy system installation is high. We need better regulatory reforms. The standards have to be there for importing as well as standards have to be there for installing the system. The suppliers, they need to understand the context of Pacific Island countries and the weather systems so that it's installed properly. We need capacity building of both institutions as well as the end users so that it's sustainable. We need stronger institutions and more partnership and collaborative work amongst all the stakeholders, NGOs, international organizations, academia, and all. And so, in recommendation, the policy for the policymakers, there needs to be more this energy security and climate security has to be mainstreamed in the national policies and strategic documents. People are talking about climate change, but they forget that using of renewable energy and energy efficiency also leads to resilient communities better able to adapt. So that angle can also be explored and strengthening regional and cooperation and the capacity building. So in conclusion, both energy security and climate security, they are interlinked, and we need to invest more. One possible step could be, next step could be, trying to carry out an assessment on climate security and energy security issues in our community, get their experiences documented to better inform the policymakers. And for that, probably there could be some collaborative work. So yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Prasad, especially for highlighting the issues from the Pacific Island region. And it is climate security is more pronounced in the region as sea level rise has become an existential threat for the region and its livelihood. Thank you so much to all the speakers. I have not a few questions, and I would like to ask some questions to some of these panelists. Now, to start with, if I could ask one question to the first presenter, Mr. Takisawa. Takisawa-san, you have actually focused in your presentation, you have looked at Japan's energy policy and energy security issues. In terms of Japan's energy transition strategy, how Japan is able to align with the region's climate security imperatives, especially about the supply chains and resource access? Because as we all know, Japan highly depends on energy supplies and material supplies from outside. So what is your view on that?
Japan's energy security and energy transition cannot be achieved by using only Japan's resources. Regional cooperation is essential. Japan has very limited natural resources, but other Asia-Pacific countries are rich in fossil fuels, minerals, and new energies. So establishing regional supply chains could enhance climate security in both Japan and other countries. That's my view.
Thank you, Takisawa-san. In fact, before going to the next question, I would like to request the audience to post your questions in the Q&A option in the screen. So some speakers would be able to respond to that. Now, the next question I would like to ask Professor Shrestha, in terms especially about South Asian region. The region actually has not only witnessed water scarcity or issues related to water becoming a reason for conflict sometimes. Now, how can South Asian region's energy transition can be structured in a way to prevent climate-driven displacement or conflict?
Perfect. As we say, my presentation. So South Asia has in conglomerates, we have a resource surplus, but the problem is the distribution is a problem, and resource sharing is not smoothened by the regional relations. Okay, as I said, SARC was a very good concept that was developed in earlier stages, but unfortunately, it could not function well. And BIMSTEC has to come into practice. And now the case in Bangladesh, which is now crumbling, because of political instability, the Bangladesh is also now not able to catch up with that one. So the best thing is that we can learn something from this Southeast Asian regional corporations, how the ASEAN is doing. Okay? Because a single country, as Takezawa also saying, single country energy sufficient, because once we are developing hydropower, we have to depend on a lot of things, upstream and downstreams, its effects, and the multiple facets of its uses. So we really need to have a regional cooperation in order to establish energy security. So, like example, Japan and Korea had a lot of disputes in the past, but now they are very much coming together in order to secure this kind of thing. So we have to learn. The South Asian countries have to learn a lot from the regional cooperation that has been established in ASEAN or Japan, Korea, China relations.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Shrestha. Now, let me turn to the speakers from UNDP. I have a question on how the policymakers in the region can ensure that shift to low carbon energy does not exacerbate social inequalities, and how can that contribute to contributing to instability or resource-driven conflicts. I believe UNDP has been giving special attention to these aspects. I would be grateful to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a good question, and also really touches the key of the just energy transition. A few points here. First of all, we believe that we really need to bring the just or the social dimension into energy transition policy. As I mentioned, all the countries in the region have included energy into their NDCs, but not everyone has incorporated just energy transition into NDC and their national energy strategy or policy. And that needs to be done, because if you want to take everyone on board, including different sectors, including communities in rural and remote areas, in UNDP, we support this kind of a consultation and policy development and dialogue as well to ensure different voices can be heard and taken on board in energy policy. And secondly is finance. As I mentioned, finance has been one of the biggest challenges in just energy transition in the region. So far, although I think roughly half of the investment in energy goes into clean energy sectors, but if you put that into the global context, the region attracts only 2% of global investment in clean energy. Especially, although there's huge potential, we need to bring in more private capital. That's why in UNDP, we try to support different innovative financial programs that could reduce the cost and also to make finance more affordable to different communities through blended finance, carbon finance, green bonds and bridging different concessional and commercial financing instruments together. And finally, I think, as a few colleagues already mentioned, a governance framework is very important for critical minerals, but also for clean energy supply chains. Coordination in policy and governance could improve resilience and sustainability of the countries together in the region and also together with their trading partners. I'll stop here. Tomo, would you like to add?
Thank you, Ying, for highlighting especially the importance of innovative finance mechanisms. And I'm sure UNDP is in the right place to take the lead on that. Now, before moving to the next speaker, I would like to take one question from our colleague Dr. Kentaro Tamura.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I have just one question to you and colleagues. Thank you very much for your presentation and highlighting the Southeast Asian countries' interest in the EV and renewable energy technology manufacturing. But on the other hand, as we discussed in the previous session, United States and the EU, they are become more kind of their trade policy or investment policy become more protectionist or inward looking. For example, the United States imposed a tariff on the solar panel import from Malaysia and Indonesia. I think they're targeting the Chinese affiliated companies. But I'm just wondering how South Asian countries or companies, approaching or dealing with addressing this kind of external condition. So that is my question. Thank you very much.
Maybe UNDP colleagues would like to respond first.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for the question. I guess that's a $1 million question. I'm not sure I can answer it all, but just to share a few points. I think indeed it's a challenging time for trade and global trade and supply chains. I think for the countries in this region who have built competitive advantage in domestic value chains, I can see many of them have been attracting foreign direct investment, which can benefit both sides, right? For the investor countries, but also for the destination countries as well. And I think in UNDP, we promote that kind of a multilateral approach in terms of policy coordination. So far, WTO is still is a center of the trading system, which also provides a lot of rule-based systems that gives the predictability and transparency. So that is, I think, one forum where countries can still start a dialogue and conversation about this. And of course, I think many countries have been pursuing bilateral conversations as well. But as we have seen in the history, I think trade can really benefit both sides if you approach it in the right way. And as I said, I think the key challenge now and also the causes is that in the past decades, many of the trade, probably the benefits has not been shared fairly, especially with low-income communities. And if that can be addressed through more inclusive and sustainable trade policies, I still believe that trade can be done in a way that benefits both the region in this region and also its trading partners, including the United States, because they have competitive advantages in different sectors. No country, maybe not cost effective to produce everything domestically. There's still scope for them to complement each other. Let me stop here.
Beautiful. I have nothing to add.
Thank you so much for the answer. Now, I can see that Ms. Yamamoto, who is supposed to join us, she would like to add something. Ms. Yamamoto, please go ahead.
Sorry, thank you very much. Just to add what Ian said on this part, I think it's also good to look at the opportunity side. yes, the current, the recent movement of US moving away from climate action is very, very concerning. But at the same time, in that political context, we could probably expect that the US government will provide not so much, or if at all, subsidies towards renewable energy investment to their own industry. So that, usually with heavy subsidies, some, major industries players on the large countries companies can have a really strong head start. But in the current situation, we would not expect that. So this kind of present an opportunity for companies with outside of US and to stay, or to be ahead of the curve. And it is not just the US and the US. I mean, the potential market, looking at those energy dependencies in the US is still very much highly energy independent, and they are still, I think they will try to, make sure that they will buy their own products. So this is, I think, in a Southeast Asia, as a manufacturer of these new renewable energy technologies and equipment, I hope that the countries here in Southeast Asia will consider that as also an opportunity to get ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yamamoto, for this insightful input. Now, in consideration of the time, I would like to quickly mention that we have two questions from the audience. One from Mr. Joshi Devani and from another one from Subir Dhar. So I would encourage the speakers to respond via chat if possible, so that I could move to the next two other speakers who would join us. But let me quickly ask, before moving to Mr. Okano for summarizing the session, let me quickly check with Professor Prasad, if you like to share your views on how the international partnership can help Fiji or the Pacific Islands in addressing these challenges.
Thank you, Professor, for the question. And I think international partnership is very critical in terms of both finance, which is a big issue, but also financing and also technical expertise, which the region lacks. So when international aid in the form of Japan aid or Australia, New Zealand aid or UNDP, ADB, if they provide technical support as well as capacity building support and financing support. So it's very critical. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, please allow me to move in a way to, keep the session in time. I'll now move to Mr. Okano, Naoki Okano, who is a policy researcher in the Adaptation and Water Division at IGES, to summarize discussion points. Okano-san, over to you.
Thank you, Nandu-san, for I appreciate all the panel, such an enriching discussion. I learned a lot. Many thanks and congratulations to Nandu-san, Tamura-san, and Takizawa-san, the energy security team of our climate security project, for putting together this wonderful panel and workshop. And special thanks to Bim-san and Vita-san for coming over to Hayama, and Miss Yu Yamamoto-san, but I believe that I see you very soon next time. And thanks, of course, to the colleagues from Europe and US and Bangkok for joining online. I think we can all agree that it's kind of mission impossible to summarize the key points within 5 minutes from this very rich discussion. So I have to say that this is a very subjective view of myself, that I pick up 4 kind of headlines that I found from discussion. One, mainly from the framing discussion by Nandu-san and the discussant Fabian, we see that how security lens will help us to see the climate issues a little differently. So, of course, as Nandu-san underlines, once we say the climate security nexus, it sounds like an area of contestation, and there are many arguments and discourses inside. But also, Nandu-san rightly underlined that it helps us to see the missing elements from the sort of ordinary climate policies such as mitigation and adaptation. And it also stimulates strategic thinking for us who are from the think tank or for policymakers as well. And we talked about various tools such as scenario and modeling that will help us to think through such difficult issue. Second point I found mainly from the session 1 is that nexus of energy transition and geopolitics, and especially how great powers provide context to the current landscape of energy transition, and what impacts does it have to Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific context. And especially we can all agree that the United States retreat from the climate policy landscape is the crucial and most important context for us right now and in the coming 4 years at least. And the discussant talked about how different powers such as China, EU, India play a crucial role in this landscape. And we talked about key issues such as unilateral trade measures, CBAM, or critical mineral supply chain and deep sea mining and so on. Third point is it's kind of my interpretation is that we can see the dual challenges of energy transition and deepening climate change impacts. So on the one hand, we need to rapidly transit energy systems so that we can reach to the net zero target. But on the other hand, we see the deepening impacts of climate change. And we got a lot of examples from South Asia, Pacific, and Southeast Asian context, how climate impacts can disrupt the energy transition and energy supply chains. So this dual challenge should be addressed in a holistically. And if I may add one aspect that we're not really discussing in today's discussion is how we can put together the two policy documents, which is nationally determined contribution and also national adaptation plans, and how such integration would play a key role in addressing such dual challenge. The last point I found is, especially from session 2 on the regional perspective, is that each speaker really pointing to the solution-oriented views. And they point to the importance of regional collaboration in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, and how international cooperation will play a key role in in energy transition and also addressing the climate impacts. And just transition is also very important. It's mentioned a little bit, but I think I would say that we need more attention to this just transition aspect, mainly because, of course, behind the United States current policy dynamics, there's a social polarization inside the US. And I think we see the similar phenomenon in different countries in the region. So I think we need to really be inclusive and try to rethink about how we can design our climate policy in an inclusive and just manner. So these are the 4 headlines that I found from this rich discussion, and I'd like to thank again to Nandu-san and his team to putting this together. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Okano, for those points. Now, let me turn to Mr. Kawakami. Mr. Tsuyoshi Kawakami is a former senior official at Japan's Ministry of the Environment, and is currently the acting managing director of IGES. I would request Mr. Kawakami to offer concluding remarks for the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandisa. Distinguished speakers, guests, and colleagues, as we wrap up today's discussions, I'd like to extend my deepest appreciation to all the speakers, panelists, participants, and the Secretariat who have contributed your time and expertise. And of course, this event is made possible through the collaboration of the Asian Development Bank Institute and United Nations Development Program. I'd like to express my deep gratitude to the representatives of these institutions for joining hands with IGES in facilitating this highly policy-relevant workshop. The conversations we have had today underscore the complex and far-reaching impact of climate security on energy systems in the region, which reminds us that these challenges demand collective action and long-term commitment. One of the key takeaways from today's session is that climate security is no longer an abstract concern. Rather, it is a reality, shaping the way we think about energy policies, regional cooperation, and economic resiliences. We had rich discussions where many important points emerged as summarized by Okano-san, like usefulness of security lenses, implication from geopolitics aspects, how we could proceed during challenges, while learning from solution-oriented views. Those insights shared today highlight the need for stronger climate-proofing measures, strategic resource management, and policies that balance both environmental and economic imperatives in the region. More importantly, they emphasize the need for collaboration across borders, sectors, and disciplines to ensure a stable and sustainable future for the Asia-Pacific region and the world. As we move forward, the role of knowledge institutions, policymakers, and industry leaders in shaping effective responses cannot be overstated. IGES remains committed to foster these discussions, supporting evidence-based policymaking and working with our partners to translate these insights into action. I thank you all for your contributions and engagement today. Let's continue working together to build a more secure and resilient Asia-Pacific region. I look forward to our continued collaboration with ADBI, UNDP, and esteemed colleagues present here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now we close this webinar here. Thank you so much for your participation.